Hey guys, welcome back to Boring History Documentary. When we picture the Vikings, we often imagine icy winds, frozen fjords, and long ships cutting through gray northern seas. It's easy to assume that life inside their homes must have been brutally cold, especially during the long Arctic winters. And yet, remarkably, Viking houses rarely froze solid. In some of the harshest climates in medieval Europe, these communities developed homes that stayed surprisingly livable, sometimes even comfortable, through months of snow, darkness, and relentless wind. How they achieved this tells us far more than just how they survived. It reveals a deep understanding of materials, landscape, and climate that modern architecture is only beginning to fully appreciate. If you enjoy calm, carefully researched history designed for thoughtful listening, consider subscribing. It helps the channel grow and allows us to continue producing long-form documentaries like this for viewers across the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. Now, let's step inside a Viking home and see why it didn't freeze, even when the world outside did. To understand the warmth of a Viking house, we first need to understand the world it stood in. Between roughly the late 8th and early 11th centuries, during what historians call the Viking Age, Norse communities expanded outward from Scandinavia. From the fjords of Norway to the farmlands of Denmark and the forests of Sweden, and later to Iceland and even parts of Greenland, they built settlements in environments that could be unforgiving for much of the year. Winter in these regions was not simply cold. It was prolonged, dark, and damp. Coastal winds could cut through exposed land. Snow accumulated not just on the ground, but against walls and roofs. Temperatures could remain below freezing for extended periods, especially in inland or northern territories. And yet, the typical Viking dwelling, the longhouse, was specifically designed to resist these conditions. The Viking longhouse was not a fragile wooden cabin. It was a carefully engineered structure rooted in centuries of adaptation. Most longhouses were elongated buildings, often between 50 and 80 feet long, sometimes much larger depending on the status of the owner. Their shape was deliberate, low, broad, and streamlined to minimize wind resistance. But the key to warmth began not above ground, but below it. Many Viking houses were partially dug into the earth. By sinking the floor slightly beneath ground level, builders took advantage of the natural insulating properties of soil. Even in freezing weather, the temperature a short distance underground remains relatively stable compared to the air above. This simple technique significantly reduced heat loss. The walls themselves were equally important. Rather than relying solely on timber planks, Vikings frequently used a method known today as wattle and daub. Wooden posts formed a framework. Between them, woven branches were interlaced and then covered with a thick mixture of clay, mud, straw, and sometimes animal dung. Once dried, this mixture hardened into a dense, insulating barrier. In some regions, particularly in Iceland where timber was scarce, thick turf blocks were used instead of wood. These turf houses were constructed with walls that could be several feet thick. The dense sod acted as extraordinary insulation. Snow accumulating against these turf walls actually enhanced their insulating properties, forming an additional protective layer rather than a threat. The roof was another critical component. Viking roofs were steeply pitched to shed snow efficiently, preventing dangerous accumulation. They were often covered in thatch or turf. A turf roof, much like turf walls, provided insulation through its mass. The vegetation layer also helped regulate moisture and temperature fluctuations. Inside the longhouse, the central feature was the hearth. Positioned in the middle of the main hall, the open fire served as the heart of domestic life, provided light, warmth, and a place for cooking. Smoke rose upward toward roof openings or vents, though Viking houses were never completely smoke-free. A certain level of indoor smoke was normal and even useful. Smoke, unpleasant as it might seem by modern standards, helped preserve wooden beams by discouraging insects and rot. It also contributed to drying out the interior, reducing dampness during wet seasons. Heat distribution in a longhouse was surprisingly efficient. Because the structure was long and relatively narrow, warmth from the central hearth radiated outward effectively. Benches along the walls often doubled as sleeping platforms. These were positioned away from direct drafts and sometimes layered with furs and woolen blankets, trapping body heat. Human and animal warmth also played a role. In some longhouses, livestock such as cattle or sheep were housed at one end of the building during winter months. While this arrangement might seem unusual today, it was practical. Animals generate significant body heat. Their presence contributed to maintaining a stable interior temperature, particularly overnight. This integration of living space and animal shelter was not a sign of primitiveness. It was a rational adaptation to environment. In an era without central heating, maximizing every available heat source was essential. Another important factor was scale. Viking homes were communal spaces. A chieftain's hall might house extended family members, retainers, and servants under one roof. The combined body heat of many individuals significantly warmed the interior, especially during long winter nights. Clothing and interior design further supported warmth. Viking textiles were made primarily from wool, which retains insulating properties even when damp. Heavy wall hangings, woven tapestries, and layered fabrics helped block drafts and trap heat within the central living space. Doorways were designed to reduce airflow. Entrances were often small and low, requiring individuals to stoop when entering. This was not accidental. Smaller openings limit heat escape and reduce the amount of cold air entering when doors are opened. Windows, where present, were minimal. In many cases, openings were covered with animal skins or simple shutters rather than glass. This limited heat loss while still allowing some light. The result of all these elements working together was not tropical warmth. Viking homes were not modern heated houses, but they were stable, functional, and protected from the worst extremes of winter. The interior temperature, while cool by contemporary standards, was generally kept above freezing, even during severe cold spells. Perhaps most importantly, these homes were designed for the climate rather than against it. Instead of attempting to dominate nature, Viking builders cooperated with it. They used local materials, earth, turf, timber, and shaped their structures to harmonize with wind patterns, snowfall, and seasonal cycles. This approach becomes especially clear when we examine settlements in Iceland and Greenland. In Iceland, where timber resources were limited after early deforestation, turf architecture reached its peak. Entire farm complexes were built into hillsides. The landscape itself became part of the structure. In Greenland, Norse settlers adapted similar techniques. Archaeological excavations reveal thick-walled turf buildings that were deeply insulated. These communities survived for centuries in a marginal Arctic environment. Their homes were central to that survival. Modern thermal studies of reconstructed Viking houses have shown that when fires are maintained and structures are properly sealed, internal temperatures can remain surprisingly consistent. Even when outdoor temperatures drop well below freezing, interior spaces can stay within a manageable range, especially when combined with layered clothing and bedding. What emerges from this evidence is not an image of desperate survival, but of thoughtful engineering. The Vikings were skilled sailors and traders, but they were also practical builders. Their homes reflected accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. Every beam placement, wall thickness, and roof angle represented adaptation tested by time. In many ways, these structures anticipated modern sustainable design principles. Using natural insulation, minimizing heat loss, and integrating structures into the surrounding landscape are now considered forward-thinking architectural strategies. For the Vikings, they were simply necessary. So when we ask why Viking homes never froze, even in Arctic winters, the answer lies not in a single innovation but in a system. A system of earth insulation, thick turf walls, central hearth heating, communal living, animal warmth, smart ventilation, and climate-aware construction. Together, these elements formed a resilient architecture capable of withstanding some of Europe's harshest environments. And perhaps that is the deeper story. The Vikings are often remembered for their raids and voyages. But inside their homes, far from the sea, they demonstrated a quieter kind of mastery, the ability to live sustainably in balance with a demanding landscape. As we continue, we'll explore how daily life unfolded inside these longhouses, how seasonal rhythms shaped domestic routines, and how the design of these homes reflected the broader social structure of Norse society. But first, it's worth pausing to appreciate a simple truth. In a world without electricity, insulation foam, or modern heating systems, Viking communities built houses that endured Arctic winters, not by chance but by design. Inside a Viking longhouse, winter life followed a rhythm shaped by firelight and necessity. The hearth was rarely allowed to go out completely during the coldest months. Embers were carefully preserved overnight, often banked beneath ash so that a flame could be coaxed back to life in the morning without the costly effort of starting from scratch. Firewood was valuable, and in treeless regions such as parts of Iceland, dried turf and even animal dung could supplement limited timber supplies. Fuel management was therefore a quiet but essential skill within every household. The long winter evenings were not idle. With daylight limited to only a few hours in northern latitudes, much of daily activity shifted indoors. The architectural design of the house supported this seasonal shift. The central aisle, running along the hearth, functioned as both workspace and gathering area. Benches lining the walls provided seating by day and sleeping platforms by night. These raised platforms were significant. Cold air settles near the floor, so elevating sleeping areas helped reduce exposure to the chilliest air within the structure. Above, the heavy timber roof beams darkened over time from layers of smoke. While modern sensibilities might imagine this as unpleasant, the smoke layer created a subtle thermal barrier. Warm air rising from the hearth accumulated beneath the roof before gradually filtering outward through vents or porous thatch. Because Viking homes were not tightly sealed in the modern sense, a slow exchange of air occurred, preventing suffocation while still retaining most of the heat. It was a delicate balance between ventilation and insulation, achieved through experience rather than formal engineering theory. Light also played a role in thermal management. Windows were few and small, minimizing structural weakness and heat escape. During the day, doorways were briefly opened to admit light and air, but heavy coverings quickly returned to place. At night, oil lamps and the glow of the hearth provided illumination. The combined warmth of flame, bodies, animals, and thick walls created an environment that, while modest, remained functional even when snow pressed high against the exterior. Social structure was embedded in architecture. At one end of a chieftain's hall, a raised high seat marked authority. Status determined sleeping position, proximity to warmth, and access to resources. The most honored guests or family members sat closest to the central hearth, where temperatures were highest and light most abundant. Farther from the fire, conditions grew cooler. This subtle gradient of warmth mirrored social hierarchy within Norse communities. Food storage further illustrates why these homes did not freeze internally. Many longhouses incorporated attached storerooms or underground pits where temperature remained stable. Dairy products, grains, and preserved meats benefited from the earth's insulating qualities. Rather than exposing all supplies to outdoor extremes, Vikings used semi-subterranean storage to maintain consistent conditions. This prevented not only spoilage but also the interior chill that would result from repeatedly bringing in frozen provisions. It is also important to recognize that Viking settlements were rarely isolated structures. Clusters of buildings, workshops, sheds, byres, and storehouses were arranged strategically. Outbuildings could act as windbreaks, shielding the main hall from prevailing gusts. Fences and earthworks redirected drifting snow. Orientation mattered. Houses were often aligned with the landscape to reduce exposure to dominant winter winds, particularly along coastal Norway and the North Atlantic settlements. Archaeological reconstructions in Scandinavia and Iceland have demonstrated how effective these choices were. When researchers recreate turf walls at traditional thickness, sometimes exceeding 1 meter, they observe significant thermal stability. Even without continuous high flames, the mass of earth absorbs and slowly releases heat. Temperature fluctuations inside are far gentler than those outside. In essence, the house itself becomes a thermal reservoir. This principle explains why Viking homes did not freeze solid even during severe Arctic conditions. Freezing requires sustained interior temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius. Thick earthen walls, shared body heat, livestock warmth, and an active hearth made such sustained freezing unlikely. The environment inside might have been cool, but it remained above the threshold at which water barrels, stored food, or interior surfaces would freeze completely. The story of Viking warmth, then, is not about luxury. It is about resilience. It reflects a society that understood seasonal extremes and prepared accordingly. Roof angles prevented collapse. Wall thickness conserved heat. Community living multiplied warmth. Materials were chosen not for aesthetic preference but for survival efficiency. As we look deeper, we begin to see that Viking architecture was an extension of their broader worldview. The same practical intelligence that allowed them to navigate the North Atlantic, establish settlements in Iceland, and briefly reach North America also shaped the homes they built. Survival was never accidental. It was the outcome of accumulated knowledge, shared labor, and careful adaptation. And in the quiet glow of a winter hearth, within walls of turf and timber, that knowledge made the difference between endurance and exposure. Beyond insulation and heat, Viking homes were also designed to manage one of winter's most persistent challenges: moisture. In northern climates, cold alone is rarely the greatest threat to comfort. Dampness, when combined with low temperatures, creates conditions that feel far harsher than dry cold. Snow melts, breath condenses, clothing dries slowly, and without proper ventilation, interiors can quickly become unhealthy. The Viking solution was subtle but effective. Their houses were not airtight. Small gaps in roofing materials and controlled smoke openings allowed a slow, constant exchange of air. While some warmth escaped, so too did excess moisture. The central hearth helped dry clothing, tools, and even sections of the interior structure. Wet wool cloaks, hung near the fire, released steam into the rising warm air, which gradually filtered outward. This prevented the buildup of condensation that could otherwise freeze along interior walls. Floor construction also contributed to stability. Many longhouses had beaten earth floors, sometimes layered with straw or wooden planks in certain sections. Earth floors, especially when slightly recessed below ground level, absorbed and moderated humidity. Unlike stone, which can feel sharply cold to the touch, compacted soil maintains a more stable temperature when insulated by surrounding ground. In some regions, wooden walkways were added along the central aisle, reducing direct contact with cold surfaces. Seasonal preparation played a major role. Before winter set in, repairs were made to turf walls, thatch was reinforced, and gaps were sealed with fresh clay or moss. These annual maintenance routines ensured that insulation remained effective. Turf, in particular, required attention. Over time, it could shift or erode. Replacing and reinforcing it before heavy snowfall was essential to maintaining structural warmth. Snow itself became part of the insulation strategy. When it drifted against thick turf walls, it formed an additional protective barrier. Snow contains trapped air, which makes it a surprisingly effective insulator. Rather than clearing every accumulation, Vikings often allowed snow to build up along exterior walls, especially on the windward side. This reduced direct exposure to freezing air and stabilized interior temperatures further. Another overlooked factor was psychological adaptation. Viking communities were culturally prepared for winter. Clothing was layered, diets were calorie-dense, and daily routines adjusted to reduce daylight. A house did not need to feel like a modern heated room to be considered warm. Expectations were aligned with environmental reality. When bodies are properly clothed in wool and fur, and when people gather closely around a central hearth, moderate interior temperatures are sufficient for comfort. Diet reinforced warmth. Winter meals were rich in fats and proteins, dried fish, salted meats, dairy products, and stored grains. High-calorie food supports the body's natural heat production. The home provided shelter from wind and snow. The body, sustained by proper nutrition, provided internal warmth. Together, they created a balanced system of survival. It is also worth noting that Viking architecture evolved regionally. In coastal Norway, timber was more available, and wooden longhouses dominated. In Iceland and Greenland, turf became primary. In Denmark, milder winters allowed for variations in wall thickness and structure. Yet across these regions, the core principles remained consistent. Use the earth, minimize exposure, concentrate heat, and design collectively. Modern experimental archaeology has allowed researchers to inhabit reconstructed Viking houses during winter months. These experiments confirm that interior temperatures remain relatively stable compared to outside extremes. While not warm by contemporary standards, they remain functional, rarely dropping to freezing levels when fires are maintained and structures are intact. What we see ultimately is a culture that treated housing as a living system. A Viking home was not simply a shelter erected once and forgotten. It required seasonal care, communal participation, and environmental awareness. Its survival through winter depended on cooperation between builders and materials, between families and livestock, between fire and earth. This understanding reframes the common image of Viking life. Far from being crude or primitive, their domestic architecture reveals strategic thinking and environmental literacy. They built not just to endure winter, but to live within it. And in doing so, they created homes that, even in Arctic conditions, rarely froze. As we look more closely at archaeological sites across Scandinavia and the North Atlantic, another pattern becomes clear. Viking homes were rarely experimental. They were conservative in design. Techniques that worked were repeated, refined, and passed down. This continuity mattered. In harsh climates, architectural mistakes carry consequences. Over generations, ineffective features disappear. What remains is a distilled form of practical knowledge. Excavations in Norway, Denmark, and Iceland show remarkable consistency in longhouse proportions. The curved outer walls, often slightly bowed rather than perfectly straight, were not decorative. That subtle curvature strengthened the structure against lateral wind pressure. Strong winter gusts moving across open farmland or coastal plains could exert significant force. A slightly curved wall distributes that force more evenly, reducing the risk of structural failure. Roof pitch also followed regional logic. In areas with heavy snowfall, steeper angles were common. This allowed snow to slide off rather than accumulate to dangerous levels. In milder coastal zones, roof angles could be less dramatic. The integration of local environmental data, learned through lived experience, was embedded in each settlement. Fire management within the longhouse reveals further sophistication. The hearth was not an uncontrolled blaze. Stones were often placed around and beneath the fire to absorb and radiate heat slowly. These stones functioned as primitive thermal batteries. Once warmed, they continued to release heat even after flames subsided. Ash buildup was not always cleared immediately. It provided insulation for embers and stabilized temperature. Chimneys, in the modern sense, were rare. Instead, smoke escaped through roof openings or filtered gradually through thatch. While this meant interiors were often smoky, it also slowed heat loss. A fully enclosed chimney would draw warm air upward and out more rapidly. The Viking system, though imperfect, conserved warmth by allowing smoke to linger and disperse slowly. Community layout extended beyond individual houses. Settlements were often positioned near natural resources, wooded areas, freshwater streams, grazing land, but also with consideration for shelter. Valleys offered wind protection. Slight elevations prevented flooding during thaw. In Iceland particularly, farms were sometimes nestled into low hillsides, where earth berms further shielded structures from prevailing winds. It is important to remember that winter survival was not solely architectural. Social cooperation played a central role. Households shared labor during construction and maintenance. Timber cutting, turf stacking, and roof laying required coordinated effort. The strength of a Viking home reflected the strength of its community. Isolation was rare. Resilience was collective. Inside the longhouse, daily routines adapted to conserve warmth. Doors were not opened casually during winter storms. Tasks requiring outdoor exposure were minimized during peak cold. Craft production, such as weaving, tool repair, and carving, was concentrated indoors during darker months. The house became both shelter and workshop, reinforcing its central importance. Children grew up understanding these rhythms. Knowledge of how to maintain a roof, tend a hearth, or seal a draft was part of cultural education. Survival skills were woven into ordinary life. There was no sharp divide between architecture and lifestyle. The structure and its inhabitants formed a unified system. When modern observers ask why Viking homes never froze, they often look for a single clever invention. But the answer lies in layered adaptation. Thick turf walls slowed heat transfer. Earth-sheltered floors stabilized temperature. Central hearths radiated consistent warmth. Animals added body heat. Communal living multiplied thermal mass. Snow enhanced insulation. Ventilation controlled moisture. Maintenance preserved efficiency. Each element alone might not prevent freezing. Together, they created balance. Perhaps most striking is how closely these principles align with modern sustainable architecture. Today, designers speak of passive heating, thermal mass, earth integration, and climate-responsive orientation. The Vikings practiced all of these concepts intuitively. Their homes were not wasteful. They consumed only what fuel was necessary. They relied on renewable local materials. They minimized heat loss not through technology, but through thoughtful design. In a time before central heating systems, insulation foam, or double-glazed windows, Viking builders achieved what mattered most: stability. Their homes did not need to be warm in the modern sense. They needed to remain livable, structurally sound, and above freezing through months of winter. And they succeeded not through luck, but through accumulated wisdom shaped by centuries of northern life. As we conclude, the image of the Viking longhouse becomes clearer. It was more than a wooden hall in a snowy landscape. It was a carefully engineered response to climate, community, and necessity. In its walls of turf and timber, in its steady hearth fire, and in the quiet cooperation of those who lived within it, we see a society that understood how to endure. Even in Arctic winters, their homes stood firm, rarely frozen, always purposeful, and deeply connected to the land that shaped them. There is also a broader historical context that helps explain why Viking domestic architecture developed with such precision. The Scandinavian world of the Viking Age was not isolated or technologically stagnant. Trade networks connected Norse communities to the British Isles, continental Europe, the Byzantine Empire, and even parts of the Islamic world. Through these exchanges, ideas about materials, tools, and construction techniques circulated alongside goods. However, what makes Viking homes distinct is that they did not simply imitate foreign styles. They adapted selectively. Stone architecture common in southern Europe was less practical in timber-rich Norway or turf-heavy Iceland. Instead, Scandinavian builders refined what their environment provided in abundance. Axes, iron tools, and skilled woodworking allowed for strong timber frames. Knowledge of turf cutting and stacking transformed grasslands into insulating walls. Iron production within Scandinavia also supported architectural durability. Stronger nails, fittings, and reinforced joints increased structural stability. Roof beams could span wider interiors without collapsing under snow weight. This combination of local resource use and metallurgical skill strengthened homes against seasonal stress. Climate variability during the Viking Age further shaped building design. The period between the 9th and early 11th centuries experienced relatively milder conditions in parts of the North Atlantic, sometimes referred to as the medieval warm period. Even so, winters remained severe. Sudden storms, temperature drops, and heavy snowfall were routine challenges. Homes had to withstand both average cold and extreme events. Designing for the worst case ensured survival during ordinary years. Over time, longhouses also reflected social change. As Viking societies became more stratified, larger halls emerged to display wealth and authority. These great halls were not only political centers but also thermal hubs. Large communal gatherings during winter feasts concentrated warmth and reinforced social bonds. Architecture, climate, and culture intertwined. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Borg in Norway shows that elite halls could be impressively large, yet still constructed according to the same thermal principles. Thick walls, central hearth, limited openings. Scale increased, but environmental logic remained intact. It is equally important to consider what Viking homes were not. They were not temporary shelters meant for short-term use. Many were occupied for generations. Repairs, extensions, and modifications occurred over decades. A house might shift slightly as turf settled or beams aged, but its core design endured. This long-term continuity encouraged sustainable maintenance rather than constant rebuilding. When Norse settlers expanded westward to Iceland and Greenland, they carried these principles with them. In Iceland especially, the scarcity of large timber forced even greater reliance on turf architecture. Some Icelandic farmsteads became intricate networks of interconnected rooms, partially underground, forming insulated complexes. Passageways minimized exposure when moving between living spaces during storms. The land itself became an ally in warmth retention. Greenland's Norse settlements faced even harsher limitations. Timber was scarce, imported driftwood precious, and the growing season short. Yet excavated ruins reveal substantial turf-walled structures capable of enduring centuries of Arctic climate. While the Greenland colonies eventually declined for complex economic and environmental reasons, their domestic architecture demonstrates remarkable adaptation during their existence. Modern interest in Viking building techniques has grown in recent decades, particularly among architects studying sustainable design. Experimental reconstructions show that with careful construction, interior temperatures can remain stable even during sub-zero nights. The thermal mass of earth walls moderates fluctuations. When fires are managed efficiently, freezing conditions inside are rare. In many ways, the enduring fascination with Viking homes reflects a contemporary concern: how to build responsibly in challenging climates without excessive energy consumption. The Norse solution was not technological excess but environmental literacy. They built with what they had, shaped by what they knew. So when we reconsider the question why Viking homes never froze, even in Arctic winters, we see that it is slightly misleading. It was not that they possessed a single secret technique. It was that every aspect of their living system supported resilience. Architecture, fuel management, social structure, clothing, diet, and seasonal preparation formed an integrated response to cold. Their houses were not warm by modern suburban standards, but they did not freeze. They endured, and in that endurance lies a quiet testament to human ingenuity. In the stillness of a Scandinavian winter night, with wind moving across snow-covered fields and darkness stretching for hours, a longhouse stood grounded in earth, fire glowing at its center. Within thick turf walls, families gathered, livestock shifted quietly, and heat, carefully tended, lingered in the air. It was not luxury. It was survival achieved through understanding. And that understanding allowed Viking homes to remain standing, stable, and unfrozen in some of the coldest inhabited regions of medieval Europe. If we step back and view the Viking home not just as a shelter, but as a system of knowledge, something even more compelling emerges. These structures were physical expressions of accumulated environmental memory. Each generation inherited not only land and livestock, but architectural wisdom, subtle refinements that determined whether winter would be endured with relative stability or unnecessary hardship. Consider how early settlers in Iceland adjusted after deforestation reduced timber availability. Instead of abandoning expansion, they leaned further into turf construction. Walls became thicker. Structures were more deeply embedded into the earth. Interior layouts evolved to reduce exposed surface area. Over time, Icelandic farmsteads transformed into interconnected clusters of low, grass-covered buildings that blended almost invisibly into the landscape. From a distance, especially in winter, They appeared less like constructions and more like natural extensions of the terrain. This blending with the land was not aesthetic romanticism. It reduced wind exposure dramatically. Arctic and subarctic winds can strip warmth from even solid buildings through constant pressure and infiltration. By lowering roof lines and using earth as a shield, Viking builders minimized this energy loss. Modern wind chill calculations demonstrate how dramatically perceived temperature can drop in exposed environments. The Vikings instinctively designed against that exposure. Thermal mass, a concept widely used in contemporary passive solar architecture, was central to Viking building long before it had a name. Thick earthen walls absorb heat slowly and release it gradually. During the day, when the hearth was active and bodies were moving, walls stored warmth. At night, when activity slowed and flames diminished, stored heat radiated back into the interior. This buffering effect prevented sharp temperature swings. Even the interior layout supported efficiency. The longhouse was typically divided into functional zones. Work areas, storage sections, and animal quarters were arranged to minimize unnecessary movement through exterior spaces during winter. When livestock were kept indoors, partitions controlled airflow while allowing shared warmth. This integration was strategic, not accidental. Fuel conservation was perhaps the most critical discipline. In forested Norway or Sweden, wood supplies were more abundant, but still finite. In Iceland and Greenland, fuel scarcity was constant. Driftwood was prized. Peat and turf were cut, dried, and stored carefully before winter. Fires were tended with precision. Too much fuel wasted precious resources. Too little risked discomfort or frost. The hearth was monitored almost continuously during the coldest months. It is also worth acknowledging the role of craftsmanship. Timber framing required accurate joinery. Poorly fitted beams allowed drafts. Uneven turf stacking creates gaps. Roof layering demanded attention to drainage, weight distribution, and structural balance. These were not improvised huts. They were constructed by experienced builders whose skills were respected within their communities. Archaeological reconstructions have revealed that some longhouses included small internal partitions or alcoves designed specifically for sleeping. These semi-enclosed spaces trapped heat more effectively than open halls. Curtains made of wool or animal hides could be drawn for additional insulation. Even within a shared communal structure, microclimates were created to maximize comfort. As Christianity spread through Scandinavia in the later Viking Age, church construction introduced stone architecture more widely. Yet domestic homes largely retained their traditional forms. This continuity suggests that Viking housing was already highly optimized for its environment. Change was adopted selectively, not wholesale. When we compare Viking domestic structures to those of other medieval European societies, the environmental logic stands out clearly. In Mediterranean regions, thick stone walls protected against heat. In Scandinavia, thick turf and timber walls protected against cold. Different climates produced different architectural solutions, each rational within its setting. Ultimately, the durability of Viking homes challenges simplistic assumptions about early medieval life. The ability to build structures that resisted freezing temperatures without modern insulation speaks to a sophisticated understanding of materials and environment. The Vikings were not merely warriors or sailors. They were practical engineers of daily survival. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson hidden beneath the popular image of longships and raids. The true foundation of Viking expansion was not only maritime skill, but domestic stability. A society capable of withstanding harsh winters at home could venture outward with confidence. Warmth, even modest warmth, made continuity possible. So when snow blanketed the fjords and Arctic winds swept across the North Atlantic settlements, Viking homes endured because they were designed to endure. They worked with the earth, not against it. They conserved heat rather than chasing it. They relied on community as much as construction. And in doing so, they ensured that even in Arctic winters, their homes remained steady, never luxurious, never wasteful, but rarely frozen. There is one final dimension to consider when thinking about why Viking homes did not freeze in Arctic winters: time itself. These houses were not built quickly for short-term occupation. They were designed with the expectation of long use, seasonal stress, and generational continuity. That long-term perspective changed how they were constructed, maintained, and valued. A Viking longhouse was often rebuilt on the same footprint as older structures. Archaeological layers show repeated cycles of renovation, reinforcement, and rebuilding in the same location. This continuity allowed builders to refine their approach. If a section of wall had once allowed too much draft, it was thickened. If snow drifted heavily against a certain side, earth berms were expanded. Each winter acted as a test, and each spring provided an opportunity for improvement. This gradual refinement meant that by the height of the Viking Age, domestic architecture was highly adapted to local microclimates. A coastal settlement facing the North Sea would differ slightly from an inland Norwegian valley farm. Wind patterns, snowfall density, and soil composition all influenced subtle variations in construction. What may appear to modern observers as simple turf and timber huts were, in fact, location-specific climate responses. Sound also played a role in understanding structural stability. In extreme cold, materials behave differently. Timber contracts, thatched roofing stiffens, earth hardens. Experienced inhabitants learned to recognize the normal creaks and shifts of winter expansion and contraction. A change in those sounds might indicate stress or weakness that required attention. Maintenance was constant, even during the season itself. Winter storms tested not only insulation but structural endurance. Roofs had to bear heavy snow loads without collapsing. The internal timber frame, often supported by large central posts, distributed weight effectively. This internal skeletal structure was one of the reasons longhouses could span significant interior space while remaining stable under environmental pressure. It was engineering born of necessity. Fire safety was another factor carefully managed. While the hearth was central to warmth, it was also a potential risk. The positioning of the hearth along the center line reduced the likelihood of flames reaching walls. Surrounding stones contained the fire and absorbed radiant heat. Smoke-blackened beams, though visually darkened, were actually somewhat more resistant to decay due to repeated exposure to smoke compounds. The interior environment, therefore, balanced warmth with controlled risk. It is also worth reflecting on how seasonal psychology influenced architectural effectiveness. Viking communities did not treat winter as an anomaly. It was a predictable annual event. Preparations began months in advance. Food preservation, fuel gathering, textile production, and structural repair were all timed with seasonal awareness. Because winter was expected, housing systems were maintained at full capacity before it arrived. Surprise cold can defeat even well-built structures. Anticipated cold can be managed. When spring eventually came, houses that had endured months of darkness and snow were assessed and restored. Turf might be replaced. Timber might be reinforced. Roofs might be relayered. This cyclical renewal ensured that insulation and protection remained effective year after year. The Viking home, then, was not static. It evolved, it responded, it improved, and that adaptability is perhaps the most important reason it did not freeze. It was never allowed to deteriorate to the point of vulnerability. Modern observers sometimes underestimate early medieval architecture because it lacks stone grandeur or decorative complexity. Yet, in environmental terms, Viking domestic structures were profoundly intelligent. They conserved scarce resources. They integrated human and animal warmth. They leveraged earth as insulation. They moderated airflow without eliminating it. They functioned as thermal systems long before that language existed. In the end, the question of why Viking homes never froze becomes less about a single technical feature and more about a cultural mindset. Survival in Northern Europe required attentiveness, to weather, to materials, to community cooperation. The longhouse embodied that attentiveness. When Arctic winds moved across snow-covered settlements, the thick turf walls resisted them. When temperatures dropped below freezing, the combined warmth of fire, livestock, and shared bodies sustained the interior. When moisture threatened to accumulate, ventilation and smoke carried it away. When structural stress appeared, it was addressed. The Viking home was not immune to winter. It was prepared for it. And through that preparation, quiet, methodical, and repeated across generations, these northern communities created dwellings that endured the cold without surrendering to it. As we bring this exploration to a close, it is worth reflecting on how the Viking home challenges modern assumptions about comfort and resilience. Today, warmth is often achieved through mechanical systems, central heating, electric radiators, sealed insulation panels, and climate-controlled interiors. The Viking world had none of these technologies. What it possessed instead was attentiveness to environment and a willingness to design within natural limits. The longhouse was not an isolated innovation. It was part of a broader ecological relationship. Scandinavian societies depended on forests, grazing land, fisheries, and seasonal cycles. Overexploitation could threaten survival. Because resources were finite and winter was certain, waste was dangerous. Homes therefore had to operate efficiently. Heat lost unnecessarily meant more fuel consumed. More fuel consumed meant greater labor, greater environmental strain, and increased vulnerability if supplies ran short. This understanding shaped architectural restraint. Walls were thick because thickness conserved heat. Openings were small because small openings reduced drafts. Roofs were layered because layered roofs trapped warmth. These decisions were not aesthetic preferences. They were survival calculations. Even the communal structure of Viking life amplified thermal efficiency. Extended families sharing a single large hall conserved more heat collectively than separate, smaller structures would have. Social organization and architectural design reinforced each other. Cooperation reduced exposure. The image of a Viking winter interior, fire glowing softly, smoke rising toward darkened beams, woven textiles hanging against insulated walls, suggests not luxury but stability. Temperatures may have hovered at levels modern households would consider cool, yet they remained above freezing. Water stored inside did not solidify. Livestock survived the night. Families slept without frost forming along interior surfaces. Archaeological data supports this practical reality. Organic materials preserved in excavated sites indicate that interior conditions were sufficiently stable to prevent repeated freeze-thaw damage. Structural remains show no consistent evidence of internal ice formation fracturing walls. The buildings endured winter as functioning domestic spaces, not as frozen shells. In many respects, Viking housing represents an early form of passive environmental design. The earth provided insulation, thermal mass moderated temperature, human activity generated supplemental heat, orientation reduced wind exposure, snow itself became a protective layer. All of this occurred without formal scientific modeling. It was empirical knowledge, refined through repetition. There is also a symbolic dimension. The longhouse was the center of Norse social life. It was where stories were told, decisions were made, alliances formed, and traditions passed down. This physical warmth mirrored its social function. A frozen house would represent not only physical discomfort but communal failure. Maintaining interior stability was therefore a collective priority. When we ask why Viking homes never froze, we are ultimately asking how a society adapted to one of the most demanding climates in medieval Europe. The answer lies in integration. Architecture was not separate from daily life. Fuel management was not separate from agriculture. Livestock shelter was not separate from family space. Everything worked together. The Vikings did not defeat winter. They designed around it. And that distinction matters. In a world where survival depended on preparation, knowledge, and cooperation, their homes stood as quiet achievements of engineering and culture. Thick turf walls, earth-sheltered floors, central hearths, communal warmth, and disciplined maintenance created dwellings capable of enduring Arctic conditions without succumbing to freezing temperatures. So the next time we imagine Viking settlements beneath falling snow, it is worth adjusting the image slightly. Inside those longhouses, beyond the wind and darkness, there was steady warmth. Not extravagant, not excessive, but sufficient. A carefully maintained balance between fire and earth, between community and climate. That balance is the true reason Viking homes did not freeze. And in that balance, we glimpse a deeper story of adaptation, resilience, and thoughtful design that still resonates today. There is one final layer to this story that often goes unnoticed: the way Viking domestic architecture shaped the mindset of the people who lived within it. A home that resists freezing is not simply a physical achievement. It creates psychological stability in a season defined by darkness and uncertainty. In northern latitudes, winter is not brief. In parts of Norway and Iceland, daylight can shrink to only a few hours. Storms arrive with little warning. Travel becomes dangerous. Isolation increases. In such conditions, the home becomes more than shelter. It becomes the center of emotional and social continuity. The longhouse, warm enough to remain habitable even in sub-zero temperatures, allowed life to continue in structured ways. Work did not stop. Weaving, tool repair, food preparation, storytelling, and planning for the coming seasons all took place within those insulated walls. The fact that the interior did not freeze meant that water could be stored, textiles could remain flexible, wood would not crack from internal ice expansion, and daily tasks could proceed. Temperature stability affects material durability as well. Repeated freeze-thaw cycles are destructive. When water inside wood or earthen walls freezes and expands, it weakens structure over time. Viking houses, through their insulation and constant hearth heat, reduced the likelihood of interior freezing. This preserved beams, joints, and wall integrity across many winters. Structural longevity was therefore directly connected to thermal management. It is also significant that Viking homes were built with repair in mind. Materials like turf and timber can be replaced section by section. Unlike monolithic stone buildings that may require extensive reconstruction if damaged, longhouses could be patched, reinforced, and maintained incrementally. This flexibility contributed to their resilience. Even if winter caused minor wear, spring repairs restored insulation before the next season. The cultural value placed on craftsmanship further reinforced durability. Skilled builders were respected members of society. Knowledge of joinery, wall layering, and roof construction was practical expertise, not decorative art. Because these skills were widely distributed within communities, maintenance did not depend on a rare specialist class. Every generation understood the fundamentals of keeping a house winter-ready. Climate literacy extended beyond architecture. Vikings observed wind directions, snow patterns, and seasonal moisture changes closely. Settlements were not randomly placed. They were positioned with consideration for drainage during spring thaw, access to grazing land in summer, and shelter from prevailing winter winds. Housing design began before the first timber was cut. It began with site selection. Modern studies in environmental psychology suggest that reliable shelter reduces stress and increases cooperative behavior during hardship. While we cannot measure Viking emotions directly, it is reasonable to infer that stable winter housing supported social cohesion. Communities that endured winter together, in structures that protected them from freezing conditions, strengthened bonds of trust and mutual reliance. This stability also enabled expansion. The Norse voyages across the North Atlantic to Iceland, Greenland, and briefly North America were not undertaken by a society struggling to survive each winter at home. They were launched by communities confident in their domestic resilience. The longhouse, warm and durable, was the foundation from which exploration became possible. In the end, the Viking home was an expression of balance. It balanced heat retention with ventilation, resource use with conservation, individual space with communal living. It was neither excessive nor fragile. It was precisely as robust as it needed to be. When Arctic winds swept across the landscape, the thick turf walls absorbed the force. When temperatures dropped below freezing, the hearth and shared warmth stabilized the interior. When moisture threatened to accumulate, smoke and airflow carried it away. When structural strain appeared, skilled hands repaired it. So the answer to why Viking homes never froze, even in Arctic winters, is not dramatic. It is disciplined. It is cumulative. It is rooted in generations of observation and refinement. They built with the earth. They respected the climate. They conserved heat. They lived collectively. And because of that, their homes endured the cold, season after season, rarely frozen, always resilient. As we take one last step back from the details of turf, timber, and hearth fire, we can see that Viking homes represent something broader than climate adaptation alone. They demonstrate how knowledge becomes embedded in everyday life. No written architectural manuals survive from the Viking Age explaining insulation values or airflow dynamics. Yet the results speak clearly. These communities understood their environment in practical, measurable ways. This knowledge was transmitted orally and through participation. A child growing up in a longhouse would watch adults patch walls before winter, stack fuel in dry storage, adjust smoke openings during storms, and position bedding away from drafts. Over time, these actions formed instinct. Climate awareness was not theoretical. It was habitual. Habit is powerful. It removes the need for constant deliberation. When snow began to fall heavily on one side of a roof, someone knew how to redistribute the load. When a draft developed near a doorway, moss or wool could be packed into the gap. When embers faded overnight, they were revived carefully rather than replaced wastefully. These small acts, repeated across generations, prevented freezing not through dramatic intervention, but through steady attention. There is also an important lesson in scale. Viking homes were large by early medieval European standards, especially the halls of chieftains. Larger interior volumes might seem harder to heat, yet communal living made them efficient. Concentrated activity in central zones created thermal cores within the building. Peripheral areas remained cooler but still protected from outdoor extremes. Heat was not evenly distributed, but it was strategically sufficient. Even the aesthetic simplicity of these homes contributed to performance. Interiors were functional rather than ornate. Surfaces were not dominated by cold stone or expansive glass openings. Organic materials, wood, wool, leather, earth, naturally moderated temperature and humidity. Modern sustainable design often seeks to recreate these qualities through advanced materials. The Vikings achieved them through direct use of what surrounded them. We should also remember that winter was not endless. The longhouse did not need to withstand permanent Arctic conditions, only seasonal ones. Its design acknowledged the cyclical nature of climate. When spring returned, doors opened wider, smoke cleared more easily, and daily life expanded outward again. The house flexed with the seasons, rather than resisting them rigidly. This flexibility is perhaps the most sophisticated feature of all. A structure that is too tightly sealed risks moisture buildup. One that is too open loses heat rapidly. Viking homes occupied the middle ground. They were insulated but breathable, warm but ventilated, enclosed yet adaptable. In that balance lies the real explanation. The Vikings did not possess hidden technology. They possessed alignment with landscape, materials, and seasonal rhythm. Their homes were not immune to cold. They were designed to buffer it. They did not eliminate winter. They moderated its impact. And so, when temperatures dropped across Scandinavia, Iceland, or Greenland, longhouses remained structurally sound and thermally stable. The interior air might have been cool enough to see one's breath at times, but it was rarely cold enough to freeze stored water or compromise the building itself. Life continued. Fires burned steadily. Communities endured. In popular imagination, the Viking Age is often defined by movement. Ships crossing seas, warriors traveling far from home. Yet the quiet achievement of their domestic architecture deserves equal recognition. Before a society can explore, trade, or expand, it must first survive the winter at home. The Viking longhouse made that survival possible. Thick walls of turf and timber, a central hearth carefully managed, communal warmth shared, snow embraced as insulation rather than feared, continuous maintenance, environmental awareness. These elements combine to create dwellings that, even in Arctic winters, did not freeze. Not by miracle, not by chance, but by design. Before we end, it's worth imagining a single winter evening inside one of these longhouses. Not as drama, but as ordinary routine. Outside, the wind moves steadily across open land. Snow gathers along the lower edge of the turf walls, pressing gently against them. The sky darkens early, as it does in northern winters. Temperatures drop below freezing. Inside, however, the change is gradual rather than abrupt. The hearth has been active since late afternoon. Stones around the fire have absorbed hours of heat. A pot hangs above the embers, steam rising slowly into the smoky air above. The thick earthen walls, warmed through steady exposure to interior heat, release it back gently. The roof, layered with turf and supported by heavy beams, holds the rising warmth in place. Livestock shift quietly in their section of the building, their body heat contributing subtly but consistently. Woolen garments hang near the fire, drying fully before the next day's use. Benches along the walls are layered with furs and woven blankets, insulating sleepers from cooler air lower to the ground. The door opens briefly as someone steps outside, and a cold draft enters, but only for a moment. The opening is small, closes quickly. Heat loss is limited. No frost forms on the inside of the walls. Water stored in wooden containers remains liquid. Tools rest along the interior without becoming brittle from deep freeze. The house does not feel warm in a modern sense, but it is stable, and stability is enough. This quiet steadiness was the achievement. What makes Viking homes remarkable is not that they eliminated discomfort, but that they prevented crisis. In Arctic and subarctic climates, once interior spaces freeze fully, problems multiply quickly. Food becomes inaccessible. Would joints weaken under ice expansion? Daily routines halt. By maintaining temperatures just above that threshold, Viking homes avoided these cascading failures. It is also important to understand that expectations shaped experience. People accustomed to seasonal cold develop different thermal tolerances. Proper clothing, layered wool, fur-lined cloaks, leather footwear reduced the need for high ambient temperatures. Comfort was created not by heating large volumes of air excessively, but by combining modest indoor warmth with personal insulation. Modern heating systems often attempt to overpower climate. Viking architecture negotiated with it. There is something deeply instructive in that negotiation. It suggests a worldview that accepted environmental limits and worked creatively within them. Rather than fighting winter, Viking builders asked, "How can we live with it?" The answer was layered design. Earth absorbs and stabilizes. Turf insulates. Timber frames endure. Fire radiates. Smoke ventilates. Community multiplies warmth. Maintenance preserves strength. When all of these operate together, freezing becomes unlikely. Archaeology continues to uncover variations and refinements, but the underlying pattern remains consistent across the Viking world. From rural Norwegian farms to Icelandic turf complexes and Greenlandic settlements, the principles held. Build thick, build low, build with the land, share heat, prepare early. The Viking longhouse was not primitive. It was context-specific. It responded precisely to the environment in which it stood. And perhaps that is why it still captures modern imagination. In an era increasingly concerned with sustainable design and energy efficiency, the Viking approach feels unexpectedly relevant. Passive heating, thermal mass, earth integration, minimal resource waste. These are contemporary goals, but they were Viking realities. So when we ask why Viking homes never froze, even in Arctic winters, we arrive at a conclusion that is both simple and profound. They did not freeze because they were never careless. They were built thoughtfully, maintained diligently, and inhabited collectively. And in the steady glow of a central hearth, surrounded by thick turf walls and gathered community, winter was endured, not conquered, not defeated, but endured with intelligence. That endurance is the true legacy of the Viking home. As a final reflection, it's helpful to place Viking homes within the broader arc of human adaptation to extreme climates. Across the world, from Arctic Inuit snow houses to alpine stone chalets, societies have developed architecture that reflects deep environmental understanding. The Viking longhouse belongs firmly in that tradition, shaped not by aesthetics or abstraction, but by lived experience. What distinguishes the Viking example is the combination of mobility and stability. This was a culture capable of extraordinary movement, sailing across the North Atlantic, navigating rivers deep into Eastern Europe, establishing settlements far from its Scandinavian origins. Yet, at the core of that mobility was domestic resilience. Long-distance voyages begin at a fixed hearth. Exploration depends on a secure home base. The longhouse provided that base. It created a dependable winter environment in which food could be stored safely, tools preserved, livestock protected, and families sustained. By preventing interior freezing, these homes reduced resource loss and material damage. Over time, this reliability accumulated into economic strength. A farmstead that survives each winter intact can plan beyond immediate survival, can trade, invest labor in shipbuilding, and expand outward. We often focus on Viking ships as technological achievements, and rightly so. But ships were built from timber harvested, shaped, and dried in environments made stable by domestic architecture. The same communities that mastered hull design and sail construction also mastered thermal management within their homes. There is also a cultural continuity in the symbolism of fire. In Norse belief systems, the hearth represented more than warmth. It was a center of family identity and continuity. To maintain the hearth through winter was to maintain lineage. A frozen, abandoned house signified breakdown. A lit hearth signified endurance. When we examine excavated remains, post holes marking structural beams, compacted earth floors, collapsed turf walls, we are looking at the skeletal traces of that endurance. The absence of widespread freeze damage within these ruins suggests that interior conditions were controlled carefully. The design worked. Even as climate conditions shifted toward the end of the Viking Age, with colder periods emerging in the North Atlantic, the architectural principles remained valid. Settlements may have declined for economic or political reasons, but the houses themselves were not fundamentally flawed. They had already proven capable of resisting severe winter conditions. It is tempting to romanticize Viking homes as cozy refuges in a frozen world. The reality was likely more austere. Interiors were dim, smoke lingered, space was shared closely, yet comfort must be understood relative to expectation and environment. In a world where survival depended on preparedness, a house that did not freeze was a remarkable success. And so, as we close this exploration, the image becomes clear. A longhouse stands low against the northern landscape. Its turf roof blends with surrounding earth. Snow gathers along its walls, adding insulation rather than threat. Inside, a steady fire glows. Heat rises, settles, and lingers. People and animals share space, generating warmth collectively. The structure breathes slowly, releasing moisture without surrendering heat. Winter presses from the outside, but it does not penetrate completely. The house endures. That endurance was not accidental. It was the result of observation, refinement, cooperation, and respect for climate. In understanding why Viking homes never froze, we gain insight into something larger than architecture. We see how knowledge accumulates across generations. We see how communities adapt intelligently to harsh realities. And we see how resilience often emerges not from dramatic innovation, but from careful, sustained attention to the fundamentals. The Vikings are remembered for their voyages and conquests, but perhaps their quietest achievement was simpler. They built homes that could withstand the Arctic winter, and in doing so, they built the foundation for everything that followed. As we truly conclude, it's worth considering how much of what we've explored challenges the stereotype of the Viking world. Popular culture often presents Vikings in motion, on ships, in battle, on distant shores. Yet most of their lives were not spent at sea. They were spent at home, farming, repairing tools, tending animals, preparing for winter. And winter in Scandinavia and the North Atlantic was the ultimate test. The reason Viking homes did not freeze was not because their winters were mild. They were not. It was because Viking society was structured around seasonal foresight. Summer was not simply a time of abundance. It was a time of preparation. Timber was cut and seasoned. Turf was harvested and stacked. Roofs were repaired. Gaps were sealed. Fuel was stored carefully under dry cover. Food was preserved through drying, smoking, salting, and fermenting. By the time the first serious frost arrived, the house had already been made ready. This proactive cycle is essential to understanding thermal resilience. A poorly maintained structure will always lose heat. A neglected roof will allow moisture intrusion. A thin turf wall will permit drafts. But a house examined and reinforced annually retains its performance. The Viking longhouse was not a static object. It was part of an annual maintenance ritual. There is also a physical principle that quietly underpins everything we've discussed. Insulation slows heat transfer. It does not create heat. The Vikings understood this intuitively. Thick walls and roofs did not make interiors warm by themselves. They preserved the heat generated within. That heat came from three primary sources: the hearth, livestock, and human bodies. In a large communal hall, dozens of people might gather during evening hours. Each person generates measurable thermal energy. Over time, in an insulated structure, that warmth accumulates. Add the steady output of animals and the continuous burn of a controlled hearth, and the internal temperature stabilizes above freezing, even if it never approaches modern room temperature standards. Importantly, the Vikings did not waste energy trying to heat unused space. Activity concentrated near the hearth. Sleeping areas were compact. Curtains and textiles created smaller thermal zones within the larger hall. Heat was localized where needed most. This efficiency meant that freezing conditions inside the house were unlikely unless fuel ran out entirely or the structure was severely compromised. And because fuel management was central to survival, running out was treated as a serious failure of preparation. Another often overlooked factor is ground temperature. Even in Arctic climates, soil a short distance below the surface remains significantly warmer than winter air. By partially embedding homes into the earth, Vikings reduced exposure to extreme temperature swings. Earth sheltering is now recognized as one of the most effective passive thermal strategies available. The Vikings practiced it routinely. When snow accumulated around these earth-backed walls, it created an additional insulating blanket. Modern snow shelters demonstrate the same principle. Snow traps air, and trapped air reduces heat transfer. What appears harsh from the outside can function as protection. It is also telling that when later Scandinavian architecture evolved into log houses and eventually stone and brick structures, many of the same principles endured. Compact design, small openings, thick walls, centralized heating. The Viking longhouse was not an anomaly. It was an early expression of a long regional tradition. So in the end, the reason Viking homes never froze is neither mysterious nor miraculous. They did not freeze because they were part of a system designed around survival. A system that combined environmental awareness, material intelligence, communal living, seasonal discipline, careful fuel management, continuous maintenance. No single element guaranteed warmth. Together, they created stability. And stability, in a climate defined by unpredictability and cold, was everything. When we imagine those long winter nights, wind pressing against turf walls, darkness stretching across frozen fields, we should also imagine the interior. A steady glow from the hearth, quiet conversation, the sound of animals shifting in straw, warmth held gently within thick earthen boundaries. The Viking home was not luxurious. It was not technologically advanced by modern standards. But it was enough. Enough to prevent freezing. Enough to protect food and family. Enough to endure winter after winter. And in that quiet sufficiency lies its true achievement. The Vikings may be remembered for their ships and sagas, but their survival began at the hearth, inside homes that stood firm against Arctic cold, designed carefully, maintained faithfully, and rarely frozen. If we linger just a little longer on the image of the Viking longhouse in winter, one final realization begins to take shape. These homes were not simply shelters from the cold, they were instruments of continuity. Continuity of family, continuity of memory, continuity of society itself. In climates where a single failed winter could devastate livestock, damage supplies, or weaken structures beyond repair, architectural reliability was inseparable from cultural survival. A house that froze internally was more than uncomfortable. It threatened food storage, tool preservation, and human health. Repeated freeze-thaw cycles could split wood, destabilize walls, and spoil stored provisions. Preventing that outcome was not a luxury. It was essential. The Vikings achieved this prevention not through insulation in the modern industrial sense, but through mass and moderation. Mass in the form of thick turf walls, heavy timber frames, compacted earth floors, and layered roofing. These materials did not heat quickly, but they did not cool quickly either. They slowed the exchange of energy between inside and outside. Moderation in the form of controlled fire, measured ventilation, limited openings, and concentrated activity. The hearth was never an uncontrolled blaze roaring upward through a chimney. It was a steady, deliberate source of warmth, tended carefully across hours and days. There is something deeply disciplined about that image. In modern homes, temperature can be adjusted with a dial. In a Viking longhouse, warmth required awareness. Someone had to watch the fire. Someone had to ensure fuel was dry. Someone had to repair a draft before it worsened. The stability of the interior environment depended on shared responsibility. That responsibility reinforced social cohesion. Winter narrowed life inward. The longhouse became the world. Decisions were made within its walls. Stories were told beside its hearth. Skills were practiced in its dim but steady light. The house protected not only bodies from freezing, but knowledge from fading. Archaeological excavations frequently uncover post holes marking the deep-set structural supports of longhouses. These posts carried the weight of the roof and bore the pressure of accumulated snow. Their size and placement were not arbitrary. They formed a skeletal framework designed to endure load and weather. When storms passed overhead and temperatures dropped sharply, those posts held. The turf absorbed wind. The earth stabilized the base. The roof shed snow. The interior retained just enough warmth. That phrase, just enough, is perhaps the key to the entire question. Viking homes did not create tropical interiors in Arctic climates. They did not eliminate cold entirely. They maintained conditions above crisis, above freezing, above structural failure, above collapse. In a world governed by seasonal extremes, enough was victory, and that concept feels surprisingly modern. Today, architects speak of net-zero buildings, passive heating systems, thermal envelopes, and sustainable materials. They model airflow patterns and calculate energy transfer rates. The Vikings did not have those tools, but they possessed accumulated experience. They knew, through repetition and correction, how thick a wall needed to be, how steep a roof should rise, how wide a doorway could remain without sacrificing too much heat. Their solutions were empirical, and they worked, even in Greenland, where conditions were harsher and isolation greater. Norse settlers constructed turf-walled homes capable of enduring for generations. While those colonies eventually disappeared due to complex climatic and economic pressures, their domestic architecture was not the weakness. It was one of their strengths. If anything, the survival of their houses in the archaeological record testifies to their structural intelligence. Turf walls, though organic, can endure centuries when preserved beneath soil. Timber frames leave clear impressions of durable joinery. The evidence is quiet but consistent. So when we ask one last time why Viking homes never froze, even in Arctic winters, the answer unfolds not as a single revelation, but as a pattern. They did not freeze because they were thick. They did not freeze because they were low and wind-conscious. They did not freeze because snow became insulation. They did not freeze because fire was constant and measured. They did not freeze because heat was shared. They did not freeze because they were maintained. And perhaps most importantly, they did not freeze because winter was expected. It was planned for, prepared for, respected. In that respect lies the deeper lesson of Viking domestic life. Resilience does not come from overpowering the environment. It comes from understanding it. The Viking longhouse stood as a quiet embodiment of that understanding. Built from earth and timber, warmed by fire and community, shaped by wind and snow, it endured Arctic winters not by accident, but by design. And in that endurance, we glimpse a side of Viking history far less dramatic than raiding ships or distant voyages, but no less remarkable. Because before exploration, before expansion, before legend, there was a house, and inside that house, winter did not win. As we close the circle on this story, it becomes clear that the Viking longhouse was more than architecture. It was strategy made visible. In a land where the environment dictated the rhythm of life, survival required more than courage. It required planning measured in seasons, not days. A poorly built house might survive one winter by luck. A well-built one would survive many. The Vikings aimed for the latter. The fact that their homes did not freeze solid during Arctic winters tells us something fundamental. They understood thermal thresholds. They knew, even if not in scientific language, that once interior water sources froze, once beams began to crack from expanding ice, once livestock shivered through the night, recovery would be difficult. So their goal was stability just above that line. And stability was achieved through accumulation, layer upon layer. Turf laid thick against timber frames, earth packed tightly around lower walls, roof beams supporting dense coverings of thatch or sod, snow settling along outer surfaces, reinforcing insulation rather than threatening it. Inside, fire layered upon stone, heat layered upon mass, bodies layered beneath wool and fur. Every layer slowed the cold. Every layer preserved warmth. In engineering terms, what they created was a buffered environment, one that resisted rapid change. Rapid temperature swings are destructive. Gradual transitions are survivable. Viking houses dampened extremes. Even silence played a role. During the coldest nights, movement slowed. Doors remained closed. Vent openings were adjusted carefully. Activity clustered near the hearth. Energy was conserved. Modern heating systems often encourage expansion into every corner of a building. Viking homes encouraged concentration. Warmth was strongest where life was most active. Peripheral spaces remained cooler but protected from direct exposure. This difference matters. The Vikings did not attempt to eliminate winter's presence entirely. They reduced its impact to a manageable level. And that management required cultural alignment. Everyone understood the importance of fuel stores. Everyone understood the consequences of neglecting maintenance. The house was a shared responsibility because its failure would affect everyone. There is also evidence that seasonal rituals and gatherings were timed strategically during winter months. Communal feasting, storytelling, and craftwork brought people together in the warmest parts of the house. These gatherings were not only social, they were thermally efficient. Concentrated presence meant concentrated warmth. Over time, this rhythm became tradition, and tradition reinforced design. When later medieval Scandinavian homes evolved into more compartmentalized layouts, the core principles remained: thick walls, compact plans, central heating sources, small openings. The Viking longhouse was an early articulation of a northern architectural logic that would persist for centuries. It is easy to underestimate simplicity, but simplicity refined through repetition becomes sophistication. The Vikings did not need advanced insulation materials because they had mass. They did not require sealed glass windows because they minimized openings. They did not install chimneys that drew heat away rapidly because they allowed smoke to disperse slowly. Their system was imperfect by modern standards, but effective within its context. And context is everything. In the frozen landscapes of medieval Scandinavia and the North Atlantic, effectiveness meant one thing above all: the interior remained usable. Water did not freeze solid. Food did not spoil from deep cold. Timber did not split from internal ice expansion. Families did not abandon their homes in midwinter. The house held. That quiet holding, through wind, snow, darkness, and months of cold, was the achievement. When we strip away romantic imagery and dramatic storytelling, what remains is practical brilliance. A people who learned to read the land, who built low against the wind, who trusted earth as insulation, who tended fire with patience, who shared warmth collectively. They did not defeat the Arctic winter. They endured it, and endurance, sustained year after year, becomes legacy. So the next time we imagine a Viking settlement under a heavy sky of snow, it is worth remembering what was happening inside those grass-covered roofs. Not freezing silence, but controlled warmth. Not collapse, but continuity. Not desperation, but preparation. The Viking longhouse did not freeze because it was never meant to stand alone against the cold. It stood as part of a system of knowledge, of labor, of community, and of respect for climate. And within that system, even Arctic winters could be faced, not comfortably perhaps, but confidently. That is why their homes endured. And that is why, even in the harshest northern cold, they rarely froze. If we let the image settle one final time, we begin to understand that the Viking longhouse was not simply reacting to winter, it was calibrated to it. Calibration implies adjustment, measurement, and restraint. The Vikings may not have had thermometers or insulation ratings, but they possessed something equally powerful: lived feedback. Every winter tested their construction choices. Every draft revealed a weakness. Every sagging roof beam under snow taught a lesson. And each lesson was incorporated into the next repair, the next rebuild, the next generation's understanding. Over decades, even centuries, That process produced homes that were finely tuned to their environments. In Norway's fjord regions, longhouses often sat where hills offered partial shelter from prevailing winds. In Denmark's flatter landscapes, orientation became critical to reducing exposure. In Iceland, where volcanic soil and limited timber forced adaptation, turf architecture reached extraordinary thickness and complexity. In Greenland, where cold was more severe and resources scarce, the same fundamental principles were pushed to their limits. Different landscapes, same logic: minimize exposure, maximize insulation, concentrate heat, preserve resources. The Viking house did not fight the environment with brute force. It negotiated with it. Negotiation is a subtle skill. It requires compromise. The interior might remain dim to preserve insulation. Smoke might linger because removing it too efficiently would waste warmth. Space might be shared because separating it would dilute heat. These were trade-offs, but they were intelligent trade-offs. And the result was a structure that held its internal temperature just above the point of freezing even when the outside world fell far below it. That margin, small but decisive, was everything. It meant milk did not solidify overnight inside storage vessels. It meant wooden handles did not become brittle and split from frost. It meant sleeping furs did not stiffen with ice. It meant livestock could breathe without visible frost forming on interior walls. It meant life could continue. There is also a quiet poetry in the way snow itself became part of the design. To modern eyes, snow piled against a building looks threatening. To the Vikings, it could be protective. Packed snow trapped air, and trapped air slowed heat loss. Instead of clearing every drift, they sometimes allowed it to accumulate along outer walls, reinforcing insulation naturally. Nature was not only an adversary, it was occasionally an ally. This worldview, seeing the environment as something to work with rather than conquer, permeated Viking life. Their ships were shaped by wind patterns. Their farming cycles followed seasonal rhythms. Their homes reflected the same philosophy. And perhaps that is why the longhouse endures in both archaeology and imagination. It represents balance. Balance between warmth and ventilation, between openness and protection, between individual comfort and communal efficiency, between resource use and conservation. In many ways, the Viking home anticipates conversations we are having today about sustainable living. How much energy is enough? How can buildings respond to climate rather than overpower it? How can communities share resources to reduce waste? The Vikings answered these questions not in theory, but in practice. Their solution was not glamorous. It was not high-tech. It was not effortless. It was attentive. Attentive to wind direction. Attentive to wall thickness. Attentive to fuel supply. Attentive to seasonal repair. Attentive to shared responsibility. And through that attentiveness, they created homes that, even in Arctic winters, did not freeze. Not because the cold was weak, but because their design was strong. When we picture the end of a long winter season, snow beginning to soften, daylight stretching slightly longer, smoke rising gently from turf-covered roofs, we are witnessing the proof of that strength. The house stands intact. The walls have held. The interior has remained stable enough to protect what mattered most. The Vikings are often remembered for boldness at sea, but perhaps their most enduring achievement was quieter. They learned how to live where winter ruled for months at a time, and they built homes that respected that rule without surrendering to it. And so, through patience, preparation, and partnership with the land, Viking homes endured the Arctic cold. Not by miracle, not by myth, but by measured, thoughtful design, winter after winter, generation after generation. And perhaps the most telling evidence of their success is this: the longhouse model persisted. Across centuries, across regions, across shifting political and religious landscapes, the core structure endured. That kind of architectural continuity does not happen by accident. Designs that fail disappear quickly. Designs that survive are the ones that work. The Viking longhouse worked. It worked in fjord valleys where icy winds funneled between mountains. It worked on open Danish plains exposed to North Sea gusts. It worked in Iceland's treeless expanses. It even worked, for centuries, in Greenland's harsher margins. The details varied, but the principles held. This consistency tells us that Viking builders had reached a kind of equilibrium with their climate. Not a perfect solution, not a comfortable one by modern standards, but an equilibrium strong enough to withstand repeated Arctic winters without interior collapse. If a house freezes solid, its weakness becomes obvious very quickly. Timber joints strain, earthen walls crack, stored food spoils, livestock suffer, people fall ill. The archaeological record does not show widespread evidence of systemic architectural failure due to freezing. Instead, it shows long-term habitation, rebuilding on the same foundations, and adaptation rather than abandonment. That speaks volumes. There is also a deeper philosophical layer beneath all of this. Viking society accepted hardship as part of life. Their architecture reflects that acceptance. The goal was not to eliminate discomfort entirely. The goal was to ensure survivability and continuity. This distinction matters. Modern expectations of indoor climate are built around constant, uniform warmth. Viking expectations were built around resilience. A room might feel cool, but it would not freeze. Breath might be visible in the air at times, but water would remain liquid. Hands might be warmed directly by fire rather than by ambient heat, but they could be warmed. The house provided a controlled microclimate within a much harsher macroclimate. And that control, modest as it may seem, was enough. It also allowed for mental stability. In a world defined by environmental uncertainty, knowing that your home could withstand winter provided psychological security. The longhouse was a constant in a seasonal cycle that otherwise brought dramatic change. This psychological dimension should not be underestimated. Architecture shapes behavior. When people trust their shelter, they can plan for the future. They can invest in craft, trade, exploration, and community life. Without secure shelter, energy is consumed by immediate survival. The Vikings had secure shelter, and that security was earned, not assumed. It was earned through careful material selection, using turf for insulation, timber for framing, stone for hearth containment. It was earned through orientation, positioning houses to reduce wind exposure. It was earned through shared labor, raising beams together, stacking turf together, repairing roofs together. It was earned through seasonal discipline, gathering fuel long before the first frost. The house was not separate from society. It was society made physical. In that sense, asking why Viking homes never froze is almost the wrong question. The better question might be, how did Viking society organize itself so that freezing did not occur? The answer lies in alignment. Alignment between climate and construction, between community and responsibility, between expectation and preparation. And perhaps that alignment is the true lesson here. Because when design reflects environment honestly, without denial, without excess, it becomes durable. The Viking longhouse was durable. It stood through snowstorms and sub-zero nights. It held heat long enough to prevent crisis, preserved food, tools, animals, and people, carried families through the darkest months of the year. And when spring came, it was still standing, ready to begin the cycle again. So the next time we imagine the Viking Age, let's widen the image. Yes, there were ships cutting across cold seas. Yes, there were distant settlements and bold journeys. But behind every voyage was a house built low and thick against the wind, a house warmed steadily by fire and shared breath, a house maintained with care before winter arrived, a house that, even in Arctic cold, did not freeze. And in that quiet endurance, we find one of the most impressive achievements of Viking life. Not dramatic, not violent, not legendary, but deeply human. They learned how to build where winter ruled, and they built well enough to endure it. As we reach the final stretch of this exploration, there is one more perspective worth considering: the passage of time itself inside a Viking home. Winter in the far north is not just cold. It is slow. Days shorten. Movement decreases. Travel becomes limited. Life turns inward. In that slowness, architecture matters even more. A structure that merely survives wind is not enough. It must sustain daily life for weeks, sometimes months, without interruption. The Viking longhouse was built for duration. Duration of darkness. Duration of cold. Duration of confinement. When temperatures outside remained below freezing for extended periods, the house did not respond with dramatic temperature swings. It responded with moderation. Thick walls slowed the cold's advance. Heated stones released stored warmth gradually. Shared body heat accumulated gently in the central space. The result was not dramatic warmth, but steady resistance. And steady resistance is what prevents freezing. In many modern climates, temperature fluctuates rapidly. Cold fronts move in and out. In Viking territories, winter often meant sustained cold. That consistency allowed their thermal system to function predictably. The hearth was not fighting sudden temperature drops every hour. It was countering a stable external cold with stable internal heat. The relationship was almost mathematical. Outside, persistent cold. Inside, persistent warmth, low but continuous. So long as the internal warmth remained slightly stronger than the heat loss through walls and roof, freezing would not occur. This is why maintenance and fuel management were so crucial. If the hearth went cold for too long during severe weather, the balance could tip. But Viking communities structured life to prevent that lapse. Firewood was rationed carefully. Embers were preserved overnight. Even when flames burned low, they rarely vanished completely. There is evidence that stones from the hearth were sometimes shifted or rearranged to optimize heat retention. Some reconstructions suggest that reflective surfaces, bright metal objects or polished wood, may have subtly improved radiant warmth near seating areas. Small adjustments like these accumulate into noticeable effects over long winter periods. Another factor often overlooked is humidity. Extremely dry air can feel colder and allow faster heat transfer. Viking homes, with their combination of earth walls, animals, cooking steam, and human presence, maintained moderate interior humidity. This would have softened the harshness of the cold slightly, even if temperatures were low. It's a reminder that comfort is not defined by a single measurement. Temperature, airflow, humidity, clothing, proximity to heat, all interact. The Viking home managed all of them at once, not perfectly but sufficiently. And sufficiency was enough. When archaeologists reconstruct Viking longhouses today and inhabit them during winter trials, a consistent conclusion emerges. The interior is far more stable than one might assume from the outside. The thick turf and earth absorb temperature change slowly. Even when the external air drops sharply overnight, interior cooling happens gradually. That delay buys time to add fuel, time to adjust ventilation, time to maintain balance. That delay is protection. In essence, Viking homes were thermal shock absorbers. They absorbed environmental stress and released it slowly. They softened extremes. They converted violent weather into manageable discomfort. And that conversion made all the difference. Because survival is rarely about eliminating hardship. It is about reducing hardship to a tolerable level. The Vikings mastered that reduction. Their homes did not create luxury. They created livability, and livability sustained culture. It allowed stories to be told by firelight. It allowed children to grow through winter without frostbite. It allowed tools to remain usable. It allowed livestock to survive until spring pasture. In a land shaped by ice and sea, that achievement cannot be overstated. So when we finally answer the question, why Viking homes never froze, even in Arctic winters, we can say this with clarity. They were not lucky. They were not magically insulated. They were not heated extravagantly. They were thoughtfully built, seasonally maintained, and communally sustained. They were designed to buffer cold, not banish it. They were part of a disciplined rhythm that respected winter rather than denying it. And in that respect, quiet, steady, practical, the Viking longhouse stands as one of the most successful examples of climate-adapted architecture in early medieval Europe. Even in Arctic winters, they held their warmth. Not perfectly, but enough. And sometimes, enough is the greatest achievement of all. If we allow ourselves one final perspective, we can see that the Viking longhouse represents something almost counterintuitive about resilience. Strength does not always come from hardness. It often comes from flexibility. Stone cracks under repeated freeze-thaw cycles. Rigid materials fracture when stressed. But turf compresses. Earth shifts slightly without breaking. Timber bends before it snaps. The very materials the Vikings chose, organic, layered, responsive, were well suited to climates defined by fluctuation and pressure. This flexibility mattered in winter, as temperatures dropped and rose in subtle cycles. As snow accumulated and melted unevenly, the house absorbed those changes. Turf walls could settle without collapsing. Timber joints allowed slight movement. The structure adjusted rather than resisting rigidly. In that sense, Viking homes were not only insulated, they were adaptive. Adaptation also appeared in how interiors were used. During the coldest periods, activity zones narrowed toward the center. Peripheral areas might be used less frequently, conserving warmth where it was needed most. Sleeping arrangements could shift seasonally. Storage could be rearranged to protect vulnerable goods. The building did not change physically each week, but human behavior within it did. That cooperation between structure and inhabitant is critical. A well-designed building can fail if used carelessly. A modest building can succeed if used wisely. The Viking longhouse benefited from both sound construction and disciplined use. Even something as simple as door discipline mattered. In extreme cold, minimizing the duration of door openings prevents rapid heat loss. Viking entrances were typically low and narrow, forcing a person to stoop slightly. This design reduced the volume of cold air entering at once. It also discouraged casual in-and-out movement during storms. Small details repeated consistently prevent freezing. We should also remember that winter light levels were low. Limited daylight meant fewer long periods of open-door ventilation. Artificial lighting from oil lamps and the hearth replaced reliance on large window openings. Less glazing meant less heat escape. What might seem like architectural limitation was, in fact, thermal advantage. There is a broader lesson in this about expectations. The Vikings did not aim for uniform warmth throughout their homes. They accepted gradients, warmer near the hearth, cooler near the walls. These gradients were manageable. They allowed for zoning long before the concept existed in architectural vocabulary. Modern heating often attempts to equalize temperature everywhere. Viking heating concentrated it strategically. Concentration is efficient, and efficiency prevents freezing. As we consider their settlements in Iceland and Greenland, this efficiency becomes even more impressive. In regions where timber was scarce and fuel limited, survival demanded careful allocation of resources. Thick turf walls reduced fuel demand. Earth-sheltered floors reduced exposure. Compact, interconnected rooms reduced heat loss when moving between spaces. The house became an energy-saving device. That phrase may sound modern, but it applies accurately. The Viking longhouse conserved thermal energy through mass, layering, and communal use. It required input, fuel, and human presence, but it amplified that input effectively. Once warmed, it retained heat longer than its simple materials might suggest. And so, across the North Atlantic world, from Norway's coastal farms to Icelandic valleys and Greenlandic fjords, these homes endured Arctic winters without surrendering to internal frost. They did not create warmth from nothing. They preserved it. They stretched it. They shared it. That sharing may be the most powerful element of all. Warmth was collective. Firelight illuminated many faces at once. Livestock heat benefited humans. Human presence benefited livestock. Resources were pooled. Isolation weakens thermal systems. Community strengthens them. The Viking house embodied that principle physically and socially. So when we strip away myth and exaggeration, we are left with something quieter, but perhaps more impressive. A people who understood their climate deeply. A building tradition refined over generations. A communal rhythm aligned with seasonal reality. And a home low, thick, earthbound, that stood steady when winter pressed hard. The Vikings are often remembered for their daring. But endurance requires a different kind of courage. It requires patience. It requires preparation. It requires respect for limits. Their homes did not freeze because they were built within those limits, not beyond them. And in that restraint, that careful calibration between cold and warmth, we find the true reason Viking homes endured Arctic winters. Not by overpowering nature, but by living intelligently within it. As we draw this journey to its quiet conclusion, there is one last layer to uncover: how the Viking longhouse reflects a broader truth about human adaptation. Across history, societies that endure harsh climates tend to share certain characteristics. They observe closely, they prepare early, they waste little, and they build in harmony with their surroundings rather than in defiance of them. The Vikings were no exception. Their homes were not accidents of tradition. They were the physical result of centuries of accumulated northern experience. Every turf block placed against a timber frame represented knowledge passed down through lived winters. Every hearth positioned at the center of a hall represented understanding of airflow and radiant heat. Every low doorway and thick wall represented a decision shaped by climate. It is tempting to imagine that life inside these homes must have been relentlessly uncomfortable. But comfort is relative. In a society adapted to cold, warmth is measured differently. It is measured in the absence of crisis, in the ability to sleep through the night without frost forming on bedding, in the reliability of stored water and preserved food, in the steady glow of a fire that does not go out. The Viking house delivered that reliability, and reliability builds confidence. Confidence allows communities to plan for the long term, to plant crops, to invest labor in ships, to send traders across distant waters, knowing that winter at home will not undo their efforts. Without stable domestic shelter, the outward expansion of the Viking world would have been impossible. In that sense, the longhouse was not merely a defensive structure against cold. It was the foundation of exploration. There is also something deeply instructive about the way Viking architecture balanced imperfection with functionality. The interiors were smoky, light was limited, space was shared. Yet none of these conditions prevented survival or continuity. Instead of chasing idealized perfection, Viking builders aimed for sufficiency and resilience. They accepted trade-offs. Ventilation meant some heat loss, but prevented dangerous moisture buildup. Shared living meant less privacy, but conserved warmth. Thick turf walls meant heavy labor, but reduced fuel demand. Each compromise strengthened the whole system. Modern architecture often separates comfort systems from structural systems. Heating is mechanical. Insulation is synthetic. Ventilation is engineered separately. In the Viking world, all of these functions were integrated into the structure itself. The building was the system. That integration is perhaps the most remarkable feature of all. The house did not rely on external technology to remain habitable. It relied on its form, its materials, and the people within it. Remove any one element. The thick walls, the hearth, the shared warmth, and the system weakens. Together, they created stability. When we imagine an Arctic winter pressing hard against a Viking settlement, we should imagine more than just snow and darkness. We should imagine a community that expected it, that had repaired its roofs in autumn, that had stacked fuel in dry storage, that had thickened turf walls where needed, that had prepared collectively. Winter was not a surprise. It was an annual visitor, and the longhouse was ready for it. So when temperatures fell and winds intensified, these homes did not freeze because freezing had been planned against. Heat was retained deliberately. Fuel was rationed wisely. Movement was minimized during storms. Snow was allowed to insulate rather than threaten. In that steady, measured response, the Vikings demonstrated something far greater than brute toughness. They demonstrated understanding. Understanding of materials. Understanding of climate, understanding of limits, and it was that understanding, more than any single architectural feature, that kept their homes from freezing solid even in Arctic winters. The Viking longhouse stands, even now in its reconstructed forms, as a testament to thoughtful design. Not flashy, not excessive, but deeply intelligent. And in that intelligence lies its enduring legacy. Because sometimes the greatest achievement is not conquering the cold. It is building well enough that the cold cannot conquer you. As we settle into the final reflections of this story, it becomes clear that the Viking longhouse was not simply a response to winter. It was a quiet partnership with it. Partnership suggests mutual acknowledgement. The Vikings did not pretend the Arctic cold could be eliminated. They accepted its presence, its duration, and its force. But acceptance did not mean surrender. It meant designing within reality. The longhouse was grounded literally and figuratively in that reality. Built low to the earth, often partially embedded into it, the structure took advantage of the planet's own thermal stability. Soil does not fluctuate in temperature as rapidly as air. By leaning into the earth, Viking homes reduced exposure to the sharpest edges of winter. Above ground, turf walls thickened that protection. Turf is dense with trapped air, and trapped air slows heat transfer. Layered carefully, sometimes reaching remarkable thickness, these walls acted as buffers between inside and outside. Wind might strike them, snow might pile against them, but the cold moved inward slowly. And that slowness was everything. Inside, the hearth acted as a constant counterforce. Not a roaring blaze meant to overwhelm the cold, but a steady presence designed to tip the balance just enough. When combined with the heat of animals and human bodies, the interior temperature crossed an invisible but critical threshold. Above freezing, that threshold defines survival. Freezing interior spaces create cascading problems. Liquids solidify, containers crack, food textures degrade, structural joints weaken. By maintaining temperatures just above that point, Viking homes prevented those failures from unfolding. The difference between -1 and +2 degrees Celsius may seem small, but in structural and biological terms, it is immense. Viking architecture lived in that margin. There is also something deeply communal in this achievement. Heat was not individual, it was shared. The warmth of one body benefited another. The presence of livestock supported human survival. The fire required tending, and that tending was a collective responsibility. In many ways, the longhouse embodied the Norse understanding of interdependence. No one thrived alone in Arctic conditions. The house was built together. It was maintained together. It was inhabited together. Even the smoky interior, often noted in archaeological reconstructions, served a subtle purpose. Smoke rising slowly toward roof openings carried moisture with it. Moisture management is essential in cold climates. Excess dampness can freeze along interior surfaces, increasing discomfort and structural stress. The gentle, imperfect ventilation of Viking homes balanced heat retention with humidity control. Nothing was accidental. Not the roof pitch that shed snow. Not the small doorways that limited drafts. Not the interior layout that concentrated life around the hearth. Each element reflected refinement across generations. We should also remember that these homes stood through repeated winters. Not one season, but many. Their survival through time is proof of effectiveness. A design that fails in extreme cold is quickly abandoned. A design that endures becomes tradition. The Viking longhouse became tradition. And tradition, in this context, means success. Success at living in places where daylight fades early and cold lingers long. Success at protecting livestock through months when pasture disappears beneath snow. Success at keeping tools usable and food preserved. Success at maintaining community cohesion in the face of environmental pressure. When spring returned and snow began to recede, these homes were still standing. The walls had held. The roof had endured. The hearth could be rekindled easily. The cycle could begin again. That continuity is the final answer. Viking homes did not freeze because they were designed to preserve continuity. They moderated extremes. They accepted trade-offs. They relied on collective effort. They respected climate instead of challenging it recklessly. And in doing so, they achieved something profound. They turned one of the harshest inhabited environments in medieval Europe into a place where life could persist steadily, winter after winter. So the next time we imagine a Viking settlement beneath an Arctic sky, let's see more than cold and snow. Let's see thick turf walls absorbing wind. Let's see a low roof holding in warmth. Let's see firelight steady at the center. Let's see people gathered close, sharing heat and responsibility. Because in that shared warmth, modest but sufficient, lies the true reason their homes rarely froze. Not through myth, not through miracle, but through careful design, patient maintenance, and a deep, enduring understanding of winter itself. As we arrive at the very end of this long reflection, one final insight emerges. Viking homes did not freeze because they were part of a rhythm, not a reaction. Reaction is urgent and chaotic. Rhythm is steady and prepared. The Viking relationship with winter was rhythmic. Every year followed a familiar arc. Autumn repairs strengthened walls. Fuel was gathered and stacked carefully. Livestock were positioned strategically. Roofs were inspected. Gaps were sealed. Food was preserved. Nothing about winter's arrival was unexpected. And because it was expected, it was managed. The longhouse stood at the center of that management. It was not a passive shelter waiting to be tested. It was an active participant in the seasonal cycle. Its design anticipated cold. Its materials responded slowly to temperature change. Its occupants adjusted their behavior to maintain balance. When temperatures dropped deeply outside, the interior did not mirror that drop immediately. Thick turf and earth slowed the exchange. The hearth's steady burn nudged warmth back into the structure. Stones radiated heat long after flames dimmed. Livestock breathed quietly in the background, contributing their own thermal presence. Human bodies layered in wool and fur generated warmth continuously. None of these elements alone would have defeated an Arctic winter. Together, they created a system, and systems endure where isolated measures fail. It is important to emphasize again that Viking homes were not warm in a modern sense. They were controlled. Controlled environments do not eliminate discomfort, they prevent disaster. The interior may have been cool enough for breath to show faintly in the air, but not cold enough for stored water to solidify. Cool enough to demand layered clothing, but not cold enough to fracture beams or crack earthen walls. That margin was carefully guarded. The Vikings did not overshoot their needs. They did not attempt to superheat their dwellings, which would have required unsustainable fuel use. Instead, they found equilibrium. The hearth burned just enough. The walls insulated just enough. The shared warmth accumulated just enough. Equilibrium is a subtle achievement. It requires understanding loss rates and replenishment rates, even without scientific terminology. It requires noticing when drafts increase. It requires replacing turf before insulation weakens. It requires drying fuel thoroughly before winter begins. It requires cooperation. The Viking longhouse functioned because the society around it functioned, and that connection cannot be overstated. Architecture does not succeed independently of culture. The same structure, neglected or misused, would fail. What kept Viking homes from freezing was not only thickness of wall or central fire, it was attention. Attention to the fire before sleep. Attention to snow load on the roof. Attention to wind patterns around the settlement. Attention to moisture collecting in corners. Attention to the balance between ventilation and warmth. Over generations, that attention became instinct, and instinct became tradition. By the height of the Viking Age, the longhouse was not experimental. It was proven. Its proportions had been tested by storms. Its insulation refined by experience. Its communal layout reinforced by social necessity. That is why it endured Arctic winters, because it had already endured many before. In the end, perhaps the simplest way to understand it is this. The Vikings did not build houses for summer comfort and hope they survived winter. They built houses for winter survival and allowed them to serve summer easily. That inversion matters. When the harshest season defines your design, resilience becomes the default. So when Arctic winds howled across Scandinavian valleys and North Atlantic settlements, the longhouse did not stand fragile and exposed. It stood grounded, low against the earth, wrapped in turf, warmed by steady fire, sustained by shared presence. And within those walls, winter's power was moderated, never ignored, never conquered, but carefully contained. That is why Viking homes rarely froze. Not because the cold was weak, but because the design was wise. And in that wisdom, quiet, disciplined, and deeply practical, we find one of the most impressive achievements of Viking life. Before the ships, before the sagas, before the legends, there was a house that held its warmth through the Arctic dark. And that, perhaps, was their greatest triumph of all. If we step into one final moment, standing outside a Viking longhouse in the depth of January, we can see how all of these elements come together. The landscape is silent under snow. The air is sharp. Wind moves low across the ground. From the outside, the structure appears almost subdued against the land. Turf walls blend with the earth. The roofline sits low and practical. Snow gathers along its edges, not as an enemy, but as an added layer of insulation. There are no tall chimneys pouring smoke high into the sky. Instead, a thin, steady stream drifts upward from a roof opening, dissolving quickly into the cold air. It is subtle, controlled, continuous. That continuity is the key. Inside, the fire is not dramatic. It does not roar. It glows steadily, stones around it warm to the touch. The air is cool near the walls, but noticeably warmer near the center. People sit close together. Livestock shift quietly at the far end. Wool hangs drying near the hearth. Tools rest along beams without cracking from frost. The house is not fighting winter with force. It is absorbing winter with patience. Patience is an architectural strategy rarely discussed in modern terms. Yet the Viking longhouse depended on it. Heat was accumulated slowly. Walls released warmth gradually. Repairs were made seasonally rather than urgently. Fuel was burned carefully, not extravagantly. In a sense, the Viking home practiced thermal patience. It did not chase warmth, it retained it. It did not attempt to create summer conditions in midwinter. It aimed for stability above freezing. And stability sustained over months is resilience. This distinction reshapes how we understand their achievement. The Vikings did not need to engineer high temperatures. They needed to prevent destructive cold. Once interior conditions remained just above freezing, systems held together. Water flowed, wood remained intact, livestock survived, human health was preserved. That narrow margin between frozen and unfrozen was protected by layers of thoughtful design. Turf thick enough to slow heat loss, timber frames strong enough to bear snow weight, central hearths positioned to radiate efficiently, limited openings to reduce drafts, shared living to multiply warmth, seasonal preparation to reinforce insulation. No single feature explains everything, but together they create a pattern of intentionality. Even their settlement choices reflect this mindset. Homes were rarely placed on exposed ridgelines unless necessary. Natural windbreaks, hills, trees, terrain were used strategically. In Iceland especially, some farmsteads were partially built into slopes, allowing Earth itself to shield structures from the harshest winds. The Vikings understood that architecture begins before construction. It begins with placement, and placement determines exposure. Exposure determines heat loss. Heat loss determines fuel demand. Fuel demand determines survival risk. Every choice was connected. This interconnected thinking is what kept their homes from freezing solid. It was not technological superiority. It was systemic awareness. When spring eventually arrived and snow began to soften, the longhouse remained intact. Its walls had not split from ice. Its roof had not collapsed under unmanaged weight. Its interior had remained functional through months of cold. The house had done its job, and that job was simple in definition, profound in execution. Protect life from freezing. In the broader sweep of history, such protection may not seem as dramatic as exploration or conquest. But without it, none of those stories would have unfolded. Ships are built in warm workshops. Voyages are planned beside hearth fires. Communities expand only when their foundation is secure. The Viking longhouse was that foundation. It transformed Arctic and subarctic landscapes from hostile environments into habitable homelands. Not comfortable in the modern sense, but viable, sustainable, repeatable year after year. And so, when we ask why Viking homes never froze, even in Arctic winters, the answer no longer feels mysterious. They were designed for winter first. They were maintained with discipline. They were inhabited collectively. They balanced heat and ventilation carefully. They respected the climate. They worked with the land. And through that quiet, consistent wisdom, they endured the cold. Not by overpowering it, but by outlasting it. If we take one last, measured look at the Viking longhouse, what stands out most is not drama, but discipline. Discipline in material choice. Discipline in seasonal preparation. Discipline in fuel use. Discipline in communal living. The Vikings lived in climates where mistakes were costly. A poorly sealed wall was not a minor inconvenience. It was a liability. A neglected roof beam under snow load could become catastrophic. Running low on fuel in late winter was not uncomfortable, it was dangerous. Because the stakes were high, their architecture evolved to reduce risk. And reducing risk is the quiet art behind why their homes did not freeze. Let's consider the physics in its simplest form. Heat always moves from warmer areas to colder ones. In an Arctic winter, the outside air is relentlessly cold. To keep the inside above freezing, heat must be generated and its escape slowed. The Vikings controlled both sides of that equation. They generated modest but steady heat through the hearth, through animals, and through human presence. They slowed heat loss through thick turf walls, compact design, limited openings, earth sheltering, and layered roofing. The balance did not require high temperatures. It required sustained equilibrium. Equilibrium was maintained by routine. Every evening, embers were banked carefully beneath ash to survive the night. Every autumn, turf walls were inspected and repaired where erosion or settling had thinned insulation. Every snowfall, roof load was monitored. Every season, fuel reserves were evaluated. The house was not left to chance. That constant attentiveness prevented the internal environment from slipping below the freezing point for extended periods. And extended freezing is what damages structures. A brief dip in temperature can be tolerated. Prolonged freeze saturates materials, stiffens fibers, and fractures joints. The Viking longhouse was designed to avoid that prolonged state. Even the interior layout minimized exposure. The central hearth was aligned along the length of the hall. allowing heat to radiate efficiently through a narrow space rather than dissipating into a wide, open room. Benches raised off the floor kept sleepers above the coldest air. Hanging textiles softened drafts. Partitions created smaller thermal pockets within the larger hall. It was zoning without modern terminology. And importantly, expectations aligned with design. No one expected uniform warmth from wall to wall. They expected protection from the worst extremes. They dressed appropriately. They clustered together. They accepted gradients of temperature. Acceptance does not mean resignation. It means realistic adaptation. There is something almost modern in that philosophy. In an era when sustainability has become central to architectural discussion, the Viking approach feels surprisingly relevant. They built with local materials. They minimized waste. They optimized insulation through mass rather than manufactured products. They relied on passive systems, earth, snow, shared heat, rather than mechanical complexity. Theirs was a low-energy, high-awareness solution. And awareness is often more durable than technology. When Norse settlers reached Iceland and Greenland, they carried this awareness with them. The conditions were harsher, resources more limited. Yet the same fundamental design logic applied. Turf houses thickened. Structures were embedded deeper. Rooms interconnected to reduce exposure. The land itself was used as protection. Even in Greenland, where winters were long and unforgiving, Norse dwellings show evidence of insulation strategies that preserved interior stability. The settlements ultimately declined for complex economic and climatic reasons, but not because their homes froze immediately upon contact with Arctic air. They endured for centuries. That endurance is the proof. If Viking homes had regularly frozen solid each winter, we would see widespread evidence of structural redesign, abandonment, or dramatic architectural shifts. Instead, we see refinement of the same model. Refinement suggests success, and success in this context means above-freezing interiors. It means that the difference between -10 degrees outside and +2 degrees inside was maintained long enough, consistently enough, to preserve life and structure. That narrow thermal margin, just a few degrees, was guarded carefully. And that margin was everything. As we reflect on this, it becomes clear that the Viking longhouse is not a symbol of primitive hardship. It is a symbol of calibrated resilience. It demonstrates how human communities, without advanced machinery, can create stable microclimates in extreme environments through thoughtful design and disciplined practice. So when we imagine Arctic winds sweeping across a Viking settlement, let's not picture fragile wooden huts trembling helplessly. Instead, picture thick turf walls absorbing the gusts. Picture a low roof shedding snow. Picture a steady hearth glowing at the center. Picture families gathered closely, heat shared rather than isolated. Picture maintenance completed before winter ever arrived. Picture a structure that does not fight the cold recklessly, but contains it wisely. That containment is the answer. Viking homes did not freeze because they were built for winter first and everything else second. They did not chase comfort beyond necessity. They preserved enough warmth to prevent collapse. They relied on cooperation rather than excess. They respected the limits of their climate. And through that respect, they endured. In the end, perhaps the most remarkable thing is how unremarkable it looked. A long, low hall, turf-covered walls, smoke rising gently into a gray sky. No spectacle, no grandeur, just quiet competence. And that quiet competence, repeated winter after winter, is why Viking homes rarely froze, even in Arctic conditions. Not by miracle, not by legend, but by design, discipline, and deep understanding of the cold. As we arrive at the true end of this journey, it's worth pausing on one final thought. The Viking longhouse was a lesson in limits. In extreme climates, survival does not reward excess. It rewards calibration. Too little preparation invites disaster. Too much waste of resources invites scarcity. The Vikings lived within a narrow environmental margin, and their homes reflect that careful balance. The longhouse was not designed to impress distant observers. It was not built for aesthetic grandeur. It was built to hold warmth just long enough, just steady enough, to carry a community through months of cold and darkness. And that goal shaped everything. The structure sat low to reduce wind exposure. Its elongated form minimized surface area relative to interior space. Thick turf walls slowed heat loss. Earth-sheltered floors moderated temperature swings. Roofs were angled to shed snow but layered to retain warmth. Openings were small. Ventilation was controlled but not eliminated. The hearth burned consistently rather than dramatically. Each choice reduced volatility. Winter volatility is what destroys buildings. Sudden freezes, rapid thaw cycles, violent drafts, heavy snow loads, moisture accumulation. The Viking longhouse did not eliminate these forces, but it softened them. It converted sharp extremes into manageable gradients. And gradients are survivable. The concept may seem simple, but its execution required experience. Knowledge of where to place a house in relation to prevailing winds. Knowledge of how thick turf needed to be before insulation was effective. Knowledge of how to bank a fire so embers would survive the night. Knowledge of how much fuel was required for a long winter and how much could safely be spared. These were not abstract ideas. They were lived skills. Over time, they became cultural instinct. It is also important to remember that Viking homes were not isolated structures in empty landscapes. They were part of settlements where buildings supported one another. Outbuildings acted as windbreaks. Fences redirected snow drifts. Paths were cleared strategically. Settlement planning reduced exposure before winter even arrived. Architecture began at the scale of community, and community multiplied resilience. Inside the longhouse, life did not stop during winter. It contracted inward. Activities shifted. Crafts flourished in firelight. Stories passed from one generation to the next. The house became not only thermal protection, but a cultural anchor. A frozen house disrupts culture. A stable house sustains it. That stability allowed the Vikings to do something extraordinary, to live year after year in environments that would seem, to many modern observers, impossibly harsh. They did not live comfortably by modern standards, but they lived consistently. Consistency is what prevents freezing from becoming catastrophic. Even in Greenland, where temperatures were more severe and resources scarcer, Norse settlers relied on the same principles. Thick turf insulation, compact design, centralized heat, careful resource management. Their eventual disappearance was tied to complex ecological and economic shifts, not to immediate architectural failure under winter stress. Their houses worked. And when something works reliably in extreme conditions, it deserves recognition. Perhaps the most powerful image to leave with is this. Outside, Arctic wind presses across snowbound land. The sky is pale and dim. Frost forms on exposed surfaces. Silence settles heavily over the terrain. Inside, however, there is life. A steady fire. Warm breath rising gently, wool drying near heat, animals shifting quietly. Wood beams intact, water unfrozen. That interior scene is the answer. Viking homes did not freeze because they were built around preservation. Preservation of warmth, preservation of structure, preservation of life. They were not fragile constructions tested by winter. They were winter-tested constructions refined by experience. And in that refinement lies their success. So when we strip away exaggeration and myth, what remains is something deeply human. A community that learned how to live within cold rather than fear it. A building tradition that respected climate instead of resisting it blindly. A design philosophy rooted in enoughness rather than excess. Enough insulation, enough fire, enough shared warmth, enough preparation, enough balance. And in that careful, disciplined balance, the Viking longhouse endured Arctic winters without surrendering to ice. Not by accident, not by luck, but by knowledge, cooperation, and thoughtful design. Winter after winter, generation after generation. If we allow ourselves one final, unhurried reflection, we begin to see that the Viking longhouse was not simply architecture. It was accumulated memory made physical. Every beam carried the lessons of earlier winters. Every turf wall reflected experience with wind and frost. Every hearth placement represented generations of quiet refinement. The reason Viking homes did not freeze was not hidden in a single clever innovation. It was embedded in continuity. Continuity of craft. Continuity of climate awareness. Continuity of communal responsibility. In Northern Europe, winter was never a surprise event. It was a certainty. That certainty shaped priorities. Before exploration, before trade, before conflict, there was preparation. A society that fails to prepare for winter does not remain a society for long. The Vikings understood this deeply. The longhouse, therefore, was not built as an afterthought to more dramatic pursuits. It was the foundation that made everything else possible. And that foundation was thermally intelligent. Thick turf walls did more than block wind. They absorbed it. They slowed the outward escape of heat generated within. Earth-sheltered floors did more than provide stability. They drew on the ground's steady temperature to buffer internal fluctuations. Roofs layered with sod did more than protect from snow. They trapped warmth in dense, organic insulation. Even the smoke, often imagined as discomfort, played its part. It moved slowly upward, carrying moisture away, drying beams, discouraging decay. Ventilation was imperfect but deliberate, enough to prevent suffocation, limited enough to conserve heat. This constant negotiation between airflow and warmth is one of the most delicate balances in cold climate architecture. Too sealed, and moisture accumulates dangerously. Too open, and heat vanishes rapidly. The Vikings occupied the narrow space between those extremes, and they occupied it consistently. Consistency is the overlooked hero of this story. A single winter survived by luck proves little. Decades of winters endured by the same architectural model prove everything. Archaeological sites across Scandinavia, Iceland, and Greenland reveal not fleeting experiments, but repeated rebuilding in the same forms. When structures were replaced, they were often rebuilt on identical footprints. That repetition suggests confidence in the design. Confidence born from performance. When something keeps water from freezing indoors through long sub-zero nights, when it prevents structural damage through repeated snowstorms, when it allows livestock and people to remain sheltered and functional, it earns trust. The longhouse earned trust. It also shaped identity. In Norse culture, the hall was central not just physically but socially. It was the site of gatherings, storytelling, decision-making, and ritual. To maintain the hall through winter was to maintain social order itself. A frozen, unusable hall would disrupt more than comfort. It would disrupt cohesion. So maintaining interior warmth, modest but sufficient, was intertwined with maintaining culture. It is tempting to imagine extreme cold as an adversary that must be defeated. The Viking response suggests something different. They treated cold as a force to be moderated. They accepted that winter would press hard against their walls. They designed walls thick enough to press back gently. They did not seek dominance over climate. They sought balance with it. And balance is achieved not through force, but through understanding. Understanding that snow can insulate. Understanding that earth retains stable temperature. Understanding that shared warmth multiplies. Understanding that fire must be managed, not indulged. Understanding that preparation begins months before frost appears. These are simple insights, but their cumulative effect is profound. By the height of the Viking Age, this knowledge was embedded so deeply in everyday life that it required no formal explanation. It was tradition. It was instinct. It was normal. And normality is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of all. It was normal for Viking homes to remain usable through Arctic winters. Normal for water to remain unfrozen indoors. Normal for livestock to survive in shared shelter. Normal for walls to endure without cracking apart from deep frost. That normality did not happen by accident. It happened because architecture, behavior, and climate were aligned. When we imagine a Viking settlement under a vast northern sky, we might be drawn to the ships pulled up along a shoreline, or to distant mountains capped with snow. But the true marvel lies closer to the ground. A long, low building, turf rising along its sides, smoke drifting gently upward, a door opening briefly, then closing, and inside warmth, not abundant, not excessive, but present. Present enough to keep life moving forward. In that quiet presence lies the answer. Viking homes did not freeze because they were not designed for comfort alone. They were designed for survival. They were built to hold just enough heat, just long enough to bridge the gap between one season and the next. And in bridging that gap, year after year, they allowed a culture to thrive in places where winter ruled for months at a time. That is the enduring lesson of the Viking longhouse. Not spectacle, not myth, but mastery of margin. The narrow space between frozen and unfrozen, between collapse and continuity, between hardship and endurance. And within that narrow space, carefully guarded, Viking homes stood firm, even in Arctic winters. As we move into the final stretch of this long exploration, it becomes clear that the Viking longhouse teaches us something subtle but powerful about resilience. Survival in extreme climates is rarely about dramatic innovation. It is about refinement. Refinement over years. Refinement over generations. Refinement shaped by winter itself. Each winter acted as a quiet teacher. A draft discovered in December became a repaired seam in spring. A roof sag under heavy snow became a thicker beam the following year. A wall that allowed too much cold seepage was reinforced with additional turf. Over time, what remained was a structure honed by repetition. This evolutionary process matters. Unlike monumental stone buildings meant to impress or endure untouched for centuries, Viking longhouses were living structures. They were adjusted, patched, reinforced, and sometimes rebuilt entirely on the same foundations. They were not static, they were responsive. Responsiveness is a hallmark of intelligent design. In cold climates, rigid systems often fail. Adaptive systems endure. Turf walls could be replaced section by section. Timber beams could be reinforced. Hearthstones could be rearranged. Interior spaces could shift depending on need. The building was flexible within limits, and that flexibility allowed it to survive Arctic winters without internal freezing becoming routine. Another crucial element was scale. Viking homes were neither sprawling nor excessively compartmentalized. The elongated hall created a relatively compact volume of air that could be warmed more effectively than a wide, open interior. Heat radiating from the central hearth moved along the length of the hall, assisted by the low roofline that prevented warmth from rising too far away from occupants. Warmth remained where people were. That principle seems simple, but it is deeply efficient. Modern heating systems often waste energy warming and used spaces. Viking heating focused on lived space. Benches and sleeping areas were positioned strategically. Curtains and textiles created semi-enclosed areas. Proximity to the hearth was not random. It reflected both social status and thermal benefit. The house functioned as a layered climate. Closest to the fire, warmest. Near the walls, cooler but insulated. Beyond the walls, frozen landscape. These layers were predictable. Predictability allowed adaptation. People dressed for the conditions they knew to expect. They layered wool and fur. They moved closer to the hearth when needed. They accepted gradients rather than demanding uniformity. Acceptance of gradients is another quiet key to why freezing did not take over. Freezing is catastrophic only when it spreads unchecked. When controlled gradients exist, the cold is contained to the outermost layer, the landscape beyond the turf walls. Inside, even a few degrees above freezing is enough. We must also consider the role of livestock once more. Housing animals inside or adjacent to the main structure during winter was not simply convenient. It was thermally strategic. Large animals generate significant body heat. In a well-insulated structure, that heat accumulates gradually. Combined with the hearth and human presence, it contributes meaningfully to the internal balance. This integration of human and animal life reflects a broader ecological awareness. Resources were not separated artificially. Heat from one part of the system supported the whole, and the whole was designed for endurance. When Norse settlers expanded westward, carrying their building traditions with them, they did not abandon this logic. In Iceland and Greenland, where timber scarcity forced adaptation, turf architecture became even more pronounced. Walls thickened further, structures embedded deeper into earth, rooms interconnected to reduce exposure to wind. The principle remained unchanged. Slow heat loss, steady heat gain, careful maintenance. It worked because it was systemic. In the end, the Viking longhouse represents a deeply pragmatic philosophy. It does not promise comfort beyond necessity. It promises survival through discipline. It embodies preparation rather than reaction. When Arctic winds swept across settlements, these homes did not stand defenseless. They stood prepared. Prepared through thick insulation. Prepared through centralized heating. Prepared through shared warmth, prepared through seasonal repair, prepared through cultural habit. And that preparation is the real reason Viking homes rarely froze, even in severe winters. Not because the cold was underestimated, but because it was understood. Understood well enough to design against its worst effects. Understood well enough to maintain a narrow but decisive margin above freezing. Understood well enough that generation after generation could live, work, and endure within those walls. So when we imagine the Viking Age, Let's remember that behind every voyage and saga was a structure quietly holding warmth against the Arctic dark. A longhouse grounded in earth, a fire glowing at its center, community gathered within, and winter kept just outside the threshold where freezing begins. If we let the story settle into its final shape, what remains most striking is how unremarkable the solution appears on the surface. There were no hidden heating systems beneath the floors, no sealed glass windows trapping solar gain, no metal radiators humming with stored warmth. Instead, there was earth, there was turf, there was timber, there was fire, and there were people together. That simplicity can make the achievement easy to underestimate. But simplicity, when refined by necessity, becomes powerful. The Viking longhouse succeeded because it respected energy. Energy in the form of fuel was limited. Cutting wood required labor. In Iceland and Greenland, driftwood was scarce and precious. Peat and turf required harvesting and drying. Every log burned represented effort. Waste was not sustainable, so the house had to conserve what the fire produced. Thick turf walls were not decorative. They were thermal mass. Their density slowed the transfer of heat outward. The greater the mass, the longer warmth lingered inside. The earth beneath the floor offered a similar stabilizing effect. Below the surface, ground temperature fluctuates far less than air temperature. By sinking the structure partially into the earth, Viking builders borrowed that stability. Even snow played a role in the equation. Snow paradoxically insulates. Its trapped air pockets reduce heat flow. When it drifted against the sides of a turf house, it created an additional barrier between the interior and the frozen air beyond. The Vikings did not panic at snow pressing against their walls. In many cases, it strengthened the insulation. Inside, heat did not need to reach modern standards of comfort. It needed only to remain above freezing. The difference between frozen and unfrozen is a narrow band of temperature, but crossing it changes everything. Above freezing, water flows. Above freezing, wood remains flexible. Above freezing, food stores remain manageable. Above freezing, life continues without structural crisis. The longhouse operated in that narrow band. The hearth was central for a reason. Radiant heat moves outward evenly from a central point. The elongated shape of the building ensured that heat traveled efficiently along its length. The low roofline kept warmth closer to occupants rather than allowing it to rise and dissipate into unused space. Sleeping platforms were raised slightly from the ground, avoiding the coldest air that settles low. Wool and fur bedding trapped body heat. Curtains or textiles could create smaller, warmer microclimates within the larger hall. This was passive heating before the term existed. But architecture alone did not guarantee success. Behavior completed the system. Doors were opened briefly and intentionally. Fuel was rationed. Embers were preserved overnight beneath insulating ash. Moisture was allowed to escape gradually through roof vents and porous thatch, preventing interior dampness from freezing into frost. Moisture control is often overlooked in cold climates. Excess humidity can condense and freeze along interior surfaces, creating ice buildup. The Viking balance between smoke ventilation and insulation prevented this from becoming widespread. The longhouse was breathable but not drafty. That balance required judgment. Judgment refined by lived winters. We must also consider longevity. These homes were not built for a single season. Many stood for decades, sometimes rebuilt on the same footprint repeatedly. That continuity allowed improvement. Weak points were reinforced. Effective strategies were repeated. Ineffective ones were abandoned. Over time, the architecture reached equilibrium with the environment. Equilibrium does not mean perfection. It means stability within limits. The Vikings understood their limits. They did not attempt to create tropical interiors in Arctic regions. They did not chase excess warmth at the cost of fuel depletion. They sought sufficiency. Sufficiency is sustainable, and sustainability is durable. When Norse settlers established themselves in Iceland and later Greenland, they carried this philosophy with them. In Iceland, turf construction became even more advanced due to timber scarcity. Walls thickened dramatically, sometimes exceeding a meter in width. Complexes of interconnected rooms reduced exposure when moving between spaces during storms. In Greenland, where winters were longer and colder, the same logic applied. Turf walls, compact designs, centralized hearths. These settlements endured for centuries in challenging conditions. That endurance is the ultimate evidence. If Viking homes had regularly frozen solid during winter, these societies would have struggled to maintain livestock, preserve food, and protect tools. Instead, they persisted. They traded. They farmed. They explored. Their houses held. And in holding, they created stability. There is something quietly profound in that stability. It reminds us that survival in extreme climates does not require domination of nature. It requires cooperation with it. The Vikings cooperated with their environment. They built low to avoid wind shear. They used earth to borrow steady ground temperature. They allowed snow to insulate. They centralized heat. They shared warmth. They prepared before winter began. And so when Arctic air swept across their settlements, it did not penetrate unchecked. It met resistance, layered, thoughtful, disciplined resistance. Not dramatic, not technological in the modern sense, but effective. And that effectiveness is why Viking homes did not freeze, even in Arctic winters. They were never meant to be warm in abundance. They were meant to be warm enough to protect structure, enough to preserve food, enough to sustain livestock, enough to carry families through darkness, enough to endure. In that quiet word, enough, we find the true genius of the Viking longhouse. A structure built not for comfort beyond necessity, but for continuity beyond hardship. And in the end, continuity is what matters most. Because when spring returned and snow receded from turf-covered roofs, the longhouse still stood, intact, functional, ready for another year. Winter had come. Winter had pressed hard. But winter had not frozen the heart of the home. And that is why the Viking longhouse remains one of the most elegant examples of climate-wise architecture in the early medieval world. Not by spectacle, not by myth, but by measured, intelligent endurance. And so, as we settle into the final quiet moments of this exploration, the Viking longhouse stands before us not as a relic of hardship, but as a testament to measured intelligence. It is easy to imagine that surviving Arctic winters required extraordinary feats. But in truth, what it required most was consistency. The Vikings did not rely on sudden solutions. They relied on habits repeated every year without fail. Before winter arrived, roofs were checked. Walls were thickened where needed. Fuel was stacked carefully in dry shelter. Livestock arrangements were adjusted. Textiles were prepared and repaired. Nothing about winter was improvised. Improvisation is risky in extreme climates. Preparation is dependable. The longhouse embodied that preparation. When temperatures dropped sharply outside, the building did not react dramatically. It responded predictably. Heat from the hearth radiated outward. Stones absorbed and released warmth slowly. Thick turf walls resisted rapid heat loss. Snow gathered along the exterior, strengthening insulation rather than threatening it. Inside, warmth accumulated gently, not excessive, not luxurious, but stable. Stability is the difference between discomfort and disaster. A few degrees above freezing is not cozy by modern standards, but it is structurally transformative. At that threshold, water remains liquid. Wood retains flexibility. Stored goods remain accessible. Frost does not creep across interior surfaces. Livestock do not exhale ice into the rafters. The Vikings built for that threshold. They did not need more. They needed enough. And that word, enough, runs quietly through every aspect of their domestic life. Enough insulation to slow the cold. Enough fire to tip the balance. Enough shared warmth to support the hearth. Enough ventilation to prevent dampness from becoming ice. Enough discipline to maintain the system year after year. There was no excess to hide mistakes. If a wall thinned too much, drafts would reveal it. If fuel ran low, the interior would cool dangerously. If snow loads went unchecked, beams would strain. Feedback was immediate. That immediacy sharpened awareness. Over generations, awareness became tradition, and tradition became architecture. The longhouse we see in archaeological reconstructions is not the product of guesswork. It is the distilled outcome of centuries of environmental testing. Even when the Viking Age ended and societies evolved, the fundamental lessons of northern architecture remained. Thick walls, compact forms, centralized heat, wind-conscious placement. The logic persisted because it worked. It worked not by defeating winter, but by accommodating it. Accommodation is often misunderstood as weakness. In reality, it is strategic strength. A rigid structure that refuses to bend can fail. A structure that adjusts within limits endures. Turf compresses slightly without cracking. Timber flexes under weight before breaking. Earth moderates temperature without sudden shifts. These materials were not chosen by accident. They were chosen because they behaved well under stress, under snow load, under wind pressure, under freezing conditions. And because they behaved well, the interior climate remained within survivable margins. We must also remember the social dimension one last time. The longhouse gathered people together. Shared living reduced heat loss per person. Collective responsibility ensured that the hearth was tended and repairs were made. The house functioned because the community functioned. Isolation weakens systems. Cooperation strengthens them. The Viking home was cooperative by design. So when we picture a settlement beneath the Arctic night, dark sky stretching overhead, frost glinting in the air, wind whispering over snow, we should picture more than cold. We should picture resilience. We should picture turf walls holding steady. We should picture a low roof trapping warmth. We should picture a steady fire glowing at the center. We should picture people gathered closely, breathing warmth into the space. And we should understand that freezing did not take hold inside because everything, architecture, behavior, preparation, was aligned to prevent it. The Vikings did not build houses that ignored winter. They built houses that anticipated it. And anticipation is the quiet secret behind survival. In the end, the longhouse did not stand as a monument to comfort. It stood as a monument to balance, between heat and cold, between exposure and shelter, between scarcity and sufficiency, between nature and human adaptation. And in that carefully maintained balance, Winter was held at bay, never conquered, never dismissed, but contained. That is why Viking homes rarely froze. Not by chance, not by legend, but by steady, disciplined understanding of the cold and of themselves. If we let the final image linger just a little longer, we begin to see the Viking longhouse not only as shelter, but as a philosophy built in wood and earth. A philosophy that says, prepare before the storm. A philosophy that says, conserve what you create. A philosophy that says, share warmth. A philosophy that says, live within the limits of your land. The Arctic winter is relentless. It does not negotiate. It does not shorten itself for convenience. It arrives, it settles, and it tests everything exposed to it. The Vikings understood that exposure was the real danger. So they reduced exposure. They reduced it by building low against the wind. They reduced it by thickening walls with turf dense enough to trap air. They reduced it by sinking structures slightly into the earth. They reduced it by minimizing doorways and window openings. And inside that reduced exposure, they built a controlled environment. Not warm in abundance, but warm enough to preserve continuity. Continuity is the thread that runs quietly through this entire story. Continuity of daily routine during months of darkness. Continuity of food storage and livestock survival. Continuity of craftsmanship and storytelling by firelight. Continuity of structure from one winter to the next. When a house freezes internally, continuity breaks. Tools crack, barrels split, food spoils, animals weaken, confidence erodes. But when a house remains just above that freezing threshold, even in the depth of winter, life continues without catastrophic interruption. The Vikings built for that continuity. They did not gamble on mild winters. They assumed severity. Their homes were designed with the harshest season in mind. Summer comfort was secondary. Winter endurance was primary. That design priority explains everything. It explains the mass of the walls. It explains the central placement of the hearth. It explains the communal layout. It explains the habit of maintenance every autumn. It explains why snow against the walls was not feared. It explains why freezing indoors was rarely allowed to take hold. The longhouse was a winter-first building, and winter-first buildings endure northern climates. There is also something profoundly human in this design. The longhouse gathered people together in shared space. It concentrated heat where conversation happened. It positioned authority near warmth. It reinforced community bonds physically and socially. Shared warmth is stronger than isolated warmth. In the Arctic, isolation is vulnerability. Community is insulation. That social insulation was as important as turf or timber. Even when Norse settlers pushed into harsher frontiers like Greenland, they did not abandon this model. They deepened it. Turf walls grew thicker. Layouts became more compact. Interconnected rooms reduced exposure when moving between spaces during storms. They adjusted, but they did not abandon the principle. The principle was simple. Slow the cold, steady the heat, share the warmth, prepare early. In that simplicity lies the brilliance. It is easy to assume that survival in extreme climates requires dramatic technology. But history shows again and again that intelligent adaptation often outperforms brute force. The Viking longhouse is a case study in adaptation. It did not eliminate winter. It moderated winter. It did not overpower the cold. It resisted it gradually. It did not create comfort as luxury. It created comfort as survivability. And that difference is crucial. As we imagine the final hours of a long winter night, embers glowing, smoke drifting upward, snow pressed softly against turf walls, we can understand why freezing did not dominate these homes. The structure was prepared, the fire was tended, the community was gathered, the materials were chosen wisely, the balance was maintained, and in that balance, even Arctic cold could not penetrate fully. The Vikings are remembered for ships cutting across icy seas, for bold expeditions and distant settlements. But none of that would have been possible without stability at home. The longhouse provided that stability. It held warmth against the dark. It held structure against frost. It held community against isolation. And it did so quietly, without spectacle, winter after winter. That quiet endurance is the true answer. Viking homes did not freeze because they were designed, maintained, and inhabited with disciplined awareness of winter's power. They were not built to impress. They were built to last. And in the Arctic, lasting through winter is the greatest measure of success.